Chapter 21. Exploration Team returns. Under the watchful eyes of Li Yueming, all the members of the exploration team felt a heavy pressure. Exactly. Just as teacher had said. This time, there were only two paths left for them. If they could find a path to the surface world for the residents of the underground world, then they might leave their names in history. But if they failed, that was to die without a burial place. One of these two paths led to the supreme humans. The other led to the most sinister and terrifying hell. And now, he could only gamble. He watched the exploration team leave. Li Yueming was a little nervous. He had already simulated the exploration plan in his mind many times. The plan left for the members of the exploration team was also the best solution among the many deduction plans. However, he could not guarantee absolute safety. It could only be said that if nothing unexpected happened, in about half a month, the exploration team would bring back what he wanted most. Days passed. Li Yueming stayed in to prepare a grand welcoming ceremony for the exploration team. It was different from what Li Yueming had expected. After hearing that the exploration team had gone to the surface world to explore, the residents didn't seem very excited. Li Yueming finally understood the reason. In the past, there were also many refugees underground who were unwilling to live in this dark underground world forever. They had also tried to find a way to the surface world. These guys did not have good endings. Over time, the number of explorers naturally decreased. To the citizens of the underground world, the surface world symbolized the horror of the unknown. It was like a wild beast hiding in the darkness, waiting to devour someone. It would tear all explorers who left the ground into pieces. After hearing that the Alliance had sent a team of explorers to the surface world, many of the inhabitants of the underground world felt that this was an extremely stupid action. After all, they could live a full life even if they were underground. There was no need to abandon the good life of the moment for a little useless curiosity. Some extremists even believed that the surface world had nothing to do with them. The underground world was their home. They were certain that the exploration team would never return, and Li Yueming would pay the price for his wrong decision. Li Yueming ignored all these rumors. He still did whatever he wanted. He ordered the Alliance to forcefully mobilize manpower and resources. The details of the welcoming ceremony were also finalized. 15 days later, this unprecedented victory ceremony in the underground world was completed. Everything was ready, just pending the return of the team. However, everyone was looking forward to it. However, there was still no news from the team of explorers heading to the surface world. Li Yueming said nothing. He just told everyone to continue waiting. Waiting for the hero's triumphant return. Behind him, the 4-year-old Li Qiao patted her brother's head. Like a little adult, she said seriously, "Brother Wang Fei and the others will definitely come back safely." Li Yueming smiled and said nothing. 18 days later, the exploration team still did not return. This was already 3 days after Li Yueming's prediction. Although the homecoming team did not say anything. However, rumors of the exploration team having been completely wiped out had already spread throughout the entire underground world. Li Yueming still said nothing. However, these few nights, he would subconsciously look in the direction where the exploration team had left. On the 20th day, almost all the refugees who came to participate in the welcoming ceremony had lost their patience. Most of the participants had already left. Only a few patient fellows were still yawning listlessly. The reason why they hadn't left yet wasn't because of anything else. They just wanted to see Li Yueming make a fool of himself. After all, even in the underground world, it was impossible for Li Yueming to be liked by everyone. There were always people with different opinions. They just wanted to see Li Yueming embarrass himself. The members of the Star Moon Alliance were still loyal. No matter what the others thought. As a companion, Everyone in the alliance was still looking forward to seeing the exploration team return triumphantly. However, when the exploration team went to the surface, they only brought enough rations to last 20 days. 20 days had passed. Logically speaking, the rations carried by the team should have been exhausted. If they still haven't returned, then it was very likely that they would never return. Everyone was looking forward to it. Time passed. It was almost evening. Blood-stained figures appeared in the distance. Everyone looked over. Only then did they realize that the exploration team had really returned. Splash! Everyone became excited. Many of them even wiped their eyes repeatedly. After confirming that they were not mistaken, the entire underground world was in an uproar. The latest news is that Explorer 001 has really returned. Damn, is this for real? It's absolutely true. Many people saw it with their own eyes. Everyone, let's hurry to the Alliance's headquarters. If we're late, there won't be any seats left. The news was like a prairie fire. It instantly ignited the emotions of all the refugees in the underground world. Countless refugees who were about to sleep did not even have time to put on their shoes. Scrambling out of the rooms barefoot. After decades, the underground world finally stepped onto the surface world again. The members of the exploration team even returned alive. No matter how stupid these refugees were, they knew what this information meant. Do we really have a chance to return to the surface world now? I don't know if we'll have a chance to return to the surface world, but at least our future development won't be limited to the underground world. In the past, there were so many things that our ancestors couldn't do, but the Alliance only took a few years to do it. What does this mean? It only means, all hail the Son of God. Star Moon Alliance headquarters. At this moment, the entire Alliance was brightly lit. The crowd looked at the blood-stained youths in the fire. It was as if sizing up the new humans of the new century. When the exploration team went, there were a total of 28 members. At this moment, there were only 18 left. Wang Fei, who led the team, was slightly injured. He staggered and was carried back by Zhou Wuhei. Although there were some twists and turns in the process. However, the overall outcome still met Li Yueming's expectations. The exploration team successfully brought back what he wanted. He was secretly escorted to the deepest cell of the Alliance headquarters. Of course, these could be put aside for the time being. The most important thing now was to complete the welcoming ceremony for the exploration team. On the high platform, the surviving team members lined up. At their feet, thousands of refugees huddled together, all of them looking excited. Li Yueming's gaze slowly swept across the faces of the team members. He took a deep breath and said, "Tonight, all the humans here will remember you and the warriors who sacrificed for us. You are the heroes of all the humans in the underground world." The refugees' cheers sounded almost at the same time. "Welcome back, heroes." Everyone's shouts came from the bottom of their hearts. There was no falsehood or coercion. Chapter 22. The Place of the Captive. Hearing the cheers from below the stage, all the members of the exploration team felt their adrenaline pumping. Before setting off, Teacher said that he would prepare a grand banquet for them. At that time, they did not pay much attention to it. However, they did not expect the banquet to be so big. Using so much manpower and resources, their blood was pumping fast. At this time, they couldn't help but feel touched. Fortunately, they did not fail, successfully bringing back what Li Yueming wanted at the cost of a few team members. After more than 20 days of exploration, the members of the exploration team, who were stepping onto the surface world for the first time, saw the charm of the surface world. It was simply like a dose of poison that made them unable to stop. The underground world without sunlight or breeze was nothing to be praised for except safety. Only then did they completely understand why Li Yueming insisted on exploring the surface world. The banquet lasted the entire night. After that, the injured members of the team were sent to the medic room to recuperate. Meanwhile, Li Yueming came to the depths of the prison set up by the Star Moon Alliance alone. This place was originally used to hold felons. However, ever since the remaining sewer bosses were completely destroyed, it had been a long time since a new prisoner had been locked up. This prison had become a special existence that imprisoned the surface world humans. Li Yueming continued forward. Soon, he arrived in front of a man wrapped in a thick green cloth. The man was in his 20s. Although he looked haggard, he still tried his best to maintain his composure. However, the green hat on his head looked comical no matter how one looked at it. Li Yueming was stunned and almost laughed out loud. This guy was the leader of the group of humans in strange clothes that he had deduced previously. Li Yueming decided to go all the way. He directly sent a team of explorers to capture him from the surface world. That was the only way. Only then would he truly know what had happened on the surface world. The man looked at Li Yueming and said nervously, "Where is this place? Why did you capture me?" His accent was slightly different from the language of the underground world. But the overall difference was not much. Li Yueming said truthfully, "This is the underground world. Have you heard of it?" When he heard the words underground world, the man's pupils constricted and he revealed an extremely terrified expression. After looking around, he said in disbelief, "What did you say?" "This is a place of captivity." As soon as the place where they were kept in captivity appeared, Li Yueming immediately understood. His guess was right. It was not that the beasts had not discovered the underground world. Instead, they raised the underground world like animals. After a short and rapid breath, the man finally calmed down a little. After sizing up Li Yueming a few times, he suddenly changed the topic. "What's your purpose in capturing me? If my clansmen discover that I'm missing, they will definitely follow the traces I left behind to find me. At that time, it will definitely cause a war between the surface world and the underground world. Will you take responsibility for this outcome?" This guy was obviously lying. In the previous deduction, Li Yueming had held this guy hostage once. At that time, this fellow's so-called clansmen were even more stable, accurate, and ruthless after discovering that he was prepared to reveal his secrets. He killed this fellow with a single dagger. He did not believe that they would start a war with the underground world for him alone. Moreover, this guy's change of topic was too stiff, right? Li Yueming was expressionless. He took out an extremely sharp long saber from behind and placed it on the man's neck. He said calmly, "I'll give you another chance, choose your words carefully." He looked at the cold blade on his neck. The man's expression changed several times. The man squeezed out a stiff smile and said, "Big brother, let's talk things out. No matter what, we were from the same race decades ago. There's no need to fight, right?" Li Yueming also smiled. He revealed a few white teeth. However, the shiny blade in his hand trembled unconsciously. The man almost peed his pants. He hurriedly said, "Big brother, I was just joking. Feel free to ask me anything. I'll tell you everything I know." Hearing him beg for mercy, only then did Li Yueming retract his saber. He said with interest, "You just said that our underground world is a place of captivity." The man swallowed his saliva and asked, "Don't you know?" Li Yueming shook his head. The man looked puzzled. "In that case, how did you leave the underground world?" Li Yueming's expression did not change. He said coldly, "You don't seem to understand the situation." The man immediately shrank back. He looked at Li Yueming with fear in his eyes. One had to know that even when facing his temperamental father, the man had never been so afraid. But on Li Yueming, however, he really felt an aura that made him shudder. It was as if he was facing a ferocious tiger. Elegant and domineering. So much so that he did not even dare to retort. He said honestly, "That's right. The underground world is a breeding ground for mutated creatures." Before Li Yueming could continue asking, "Star?" The man continued, "About 20 years ago, the mutated creatures on the surface world absorbed many strange substances and developed intelligence that was not inferior to humans. They gathered and elected 8 mutated beast kings, and the mutated beast kings led the other mutated creatures to attack human territory. After that, the human shelters scattered around the world were destroyed by them. The same goes for Fallout Shelter 0911. After completely destroying the living power of humans, the mutated creatures called themselves new humans and began to learn the social order of humans. Moreover, their appearance gradually evolved into humans. In order to learn better from humans, these mutated creatures will deliberately leave a group of humans behind as the spark of civilization for them to observe and imitate. And you are the spark of civilization left behind by these mutated creatures." "That's what I said. A place to be kept in captivity." He listened to the man's description. Obviously. Even if only a few words were revealed in these exchanges, it might cause a huge commotion in the entire underground world. The underground world that the refugees treasured so much was actually just a mutated creature's social laboratory. Such an unbelievable conclusion would definitely drive many people crazy. This was not too surprising. After all, he had already sensed the abnormality from the beginning. Moreover, he had already guessed this. However, there was no evidence to prove it. A group of mutated animals seriously studied the social order of humans and called themselves the new humans of the century. It still sounded a little creepy. Li Yueming did not continue to discuss this topic. Instead, he changed the topic and asked, "What's your name and identity?" The man carefully observed the expression on Li Yueming's face. He tried to find expressions like shock and disbelief on his face. But no matter how he sized him up, he didn't see any emotion on Li Yueming's face. He could not help but say, "My name is Gu Tianyi. I'm the youngest son of the leader of the Survivor Alliance of Fallout Shelter 0911. Chapter 23. New Command, March to the Surface World. In the current surface world, humans were no longer the top predators in the food chain. The mutated creatures that could resist the strange corrosion and evolved intelligence were the true masters of this planet. After their homes were occupied, the remaining humans could only retreat again and again. In the end, they barely managed to survive. These people who had lost their homes and fled gathered together to form the Human Survivors Alliance. Gu Tianyi was the youngest son of the current leader of the Survivor Alliance. He had never been loved by his father since he was young, so he was ostracized by his brothers. During this period of time, the leader of the Survivors Alliance fell seriously ill. He probably did not have many years left to live. Gu Tianyi's brothers joined hands and found a lame excuse to send him away. They said that they wanted him to patrol the territory. But in actual fact, he was disinherited. But politics is tough when you have no backer. With no one to support him, no matter how unwilling Gu Tianyi was, he could only keep his head down and leave. That was why he was captured by Li Yueming so easily. After all, the guards beside him were all his brother's trusted aides. They were not meant to protect him at all. After asking many questions, Li Yueming stroked his chin thoughtfully. He muttered to himself, "Humans have actually fallen to the point of having to differentiate animals by naming them real humans. How interesting." Now, he finally had a thorough understanding of this world. But the more he understood, the harder it was to change one's fate. If not for the talent of infinite deduction, it should be the limit for ordinary simulators to reach his current level. But for me, everything has just begun. Li Yueming's eyes were filled with excitement. Only when there was a challenge of difficulty would there be motivation. After asking all the questions, Li Yueming prepared to leave. Seeing him turn around, Gu Tianyi asked anxiously, "Big brother, how are you going to deal with me?" Li Yueming looked back at him. He thought for a moment and said, "I haven't thought it through yet." Gu Tianyi was a little anxious. After all, he had said everything just now. He was really afraid that the person in front of him would burn the bridge after crossing it and kill him. Was there any way to save his life? He opened his mouth. Gu Tianyi suddenly had an idea and quickly asked, "Boss, what's your name? How old are you? Anyway, I can't go back to the surface world. Can I join you?" Li Yueming turned around and sized him up. Seeing how cooperative this guy was, he did not put himself in a difficult position and said truthfully, "My name is Li Yueming. I'm 16 years old this year. Whether to join me or not, I'll consider it first." At first, Gu Tianyi was still smiling. However, when he heard Li Yueming say that he was 16 years old, for a moment, Gu Tianyi thought that he was hallucinating. He said in disbelief, "What did you just say? How old are you?" Li Yueming ignored him. He turned around and left. After returning, Li Yueming locked himself in his room. According to the information he had now, the underground world was undoubtedly a place of captivity. But since it was a breeding ground, what about the keepers and regulators of the underground world? The keepers should be rats scattered all over the sewer exits. What about the regulators? The underground world had caused such a huge commotion. If mutated creatures were really as intelligent as humans, it was impossible for him to know nothing about this. But in reality, until now, Li Yueming had not noticed anything unusual. This was a mine buried in the underground world. However, Li Yueming did not have that much time to investigate this minefield for the time being. Never mind. Let's take it one step at a time. In any case, a scheme would always reveal its flaws. He could deduce indefinitely. All he had to do was deal with whatever came his way. Li Yueming spent about 3 days deducing the path he would take next. Only then did Li Yueming appear in the Star Moon Alliance's meeting hall, including the exploration team. Every member of the Star Moon Alliance was summoned. In the meeting, Li Yueming read out the new guidelines. From the day the order was given, all the men in the underground world began to practice martial arts. The majority of production and chores are performed by women. Announcement of this regulation. It undoubtedly caused another uproar in the underground world. Just by using their brains a little, everyone could guess that Li Yueming was preparing to enter the surface world. But this time, including women, 90% of the people in the underground world supported and obeyed this order. One had to know that in the past, when the refugees of the underground world were mentioned, everyone thought of the words fierce, cunning, and mercenary. They actually trusted an outsider so much. This was undoubtedly a very rare scene. In the past few days, the information about the surface world had spread to all the sewers. After knowing the beauty of the surface world, the inhabitants of the underground world showed great interest in this. Death might be terrifying, but compared to his own children, wives, and the children who had lived in this barren sewer for generations, everyone was more inclined to try their best. What if they really could return to the surface world? At that time, their children and wives would be able to enjoy the sunlight and air that normal humans should enjoy. They no longer had to be like him, tortured by all kinds of strange illnesses. Most importantly, as the current ruler of the underground world, Li Yueming really gave the residents of the underground world hope to pursue a better life. Only this group of vicious, cunning, and mercenary fellows could give him such a high level of trust. After the plan to make everyone a soldier was launched, the pressure on the food supply of the entire underground world increased. For this, Li Yueming pondered for a long time. In the end, it was decided to create a new military unit. It was called the Hunter Team. He also sent out another team of explorers. However, they had a different mission. This time, the mission of the exploration team was to lead the newly established Hunter Team to the surface world to hunt for food. Gu Tianyi was also released by Li Yueming. With a wave of his hand, he arranged for him to be the captain of the Hunter Team. After all, as a native of the surface world, only Gu Tianyi knew what mutated creatures could be provoked. He could not afford to provoke any mutated creatures. Gu Tianyi, who felt like he had just saved his life, was overjoyed. Although he was the son of a leader. However, in Fallout Shelter 0911, it was no different from being adopted. He did not expect to be able to get a small official position after being captured by Li Yueming. It was just that the refugees under him were more annoying. Every time they looked at him, it was as if he was looking at an alien. 3 years passed in a flash. Li Yueming was 19 years old. Under the efforts of the Star Moon Alliance, the entire underground civilization had made a qualitative leap. In the process of rapid development, there were new changes in the underground world almost every day. The birth rate of infants and children was breaking the previous year's record every year. Now, the headquarters of the Alliance was no longer in the middle of the sewers. Instead, they moved to the entrance near the surface world. The energy of everyone in the underground world slowly shifted toward the migration to the surface world. Because of Gu Tianyi's participation, the hunting plan of the Hunter Team was progressing smoothly. Apart from flipping the car a few times when they first started hunting, they had already gained something from the subsequent hunts. In order to increase the combat power of the army as soon as possible, Li Yueming updated the breathing technique several times and made even more detailed changes according to the different physiques of different people. He also promoted various methods to strengthen the body. For a moment, the entire Star Moon Alliance was energetic. After 3 years of perseverance, the National Martial Arts Training Plan was already slightly effective. Nowadays, any adult man in the underground world could reach the level of tearing apart ferocious beasts. On one fateful day, 3 years later, Li Yueming once again gathered all the members of the alliance. He looked at Gu Tianyi, who had already married and had children. Li Yueming patted his shoulder and said happily, "Do you want to be the leader?" Gu Tianyi froze on the spot. He almost knelt down. He trembled and said, "Be boss, even if you give me the guts of 10,000 men, I won't dare to rebel against you." Chapter 24. Kill anyone who stops me. Li Yueming once again gathered all the members of the Star Moon Alliance for a meeting. He looked at Gu Tianyi, who had already gotten married and had children in the underground world not far away. He asked with interest, "Do you want to be the leader?" The smile on Gu Tianyi's face instantly changed. His face turned pale. Lying on the ground, he said in fear and trepidation, "Boss, are you joking with me? Even if you give me the guts of 10,000 men, I won't dare to rebel against you." He looked at Gu Tianyi, who was kneeling on the ground and trembling. Only then did Li Yueming realize that Gu Tianyi seemed to have misunderstood him. He quickly corrected. "You seem to have misunderstood something. I mean, I want you to be a leader somewhere else." The doubt on Gu Tianyi's face deepened. He had yet to catch up with Li Yueming's train of thought. After chewing for a long time, Gu Tianyi looked uncertain as he probed, "You mean?" He felt the puzzled gazes of his cotters. Li Yueming said honestly, "I plan to let you return to the 0911 Survivors Alliance and become the leader of the Survivors Alliance as soon as possible." Only then did the group understand the reason for Li Yueming's meeting. After 3 years of steady expansion, currently, the Star Moon Alliance has already established itself on the surface world. At that moment, after solving the internal alliance problems, Li Yueming began to carry out his expansion plan in an orderly manner. Gu Tianyi scratched his head. He said in embarrassment, "But boss, you should know that I've never been liked by my father since I was young. His tone was very tactful. But the meaning was clear. Not to mention whether his sickly father was dead or not. Even if his father was still alive. He was a bastard son who had been kicked out of the core circle of power by a group of brothers 3 years ago. Gu Tianyi did not have any cards that he could show off. Not to mention becoming the leader. Whether or not he could protect his own life was a problem. Li Yueming was naturally prepared. He pointed at the hunter team behind Gu Tianyi and said, "You can bring a hunter team back. Is this enough?" Gu Tianyi heard this. He was stunned. He turned around and looked at the hunter team that had expanded to more than 300 people. His entire body trembled. Seeing that he did not agree immediately, Li Yueming waved his hand and said, "If it still doesn't work, I'll give you another exploration team." Gu Tianyi began to tremble uncontrollably. As a captive, there had always been a gap between Gu Tianyi and the orthodox members of the alliance. After all, no matter what, his initial identity was that of a captive. Moreover, he was not native of the underground world. Even though he had completely integrated into the underground world, no one showed any distance in front of him because of his identity. However, Gu Tianyi was well aware of this. Everything he had now was thanks to Li Yueming. A capable wife, a beautiful daughter, and a house of his own. In fact, his daughter could also enjoy free education in the underground world. Everything was so extravagant for him. If it wasn't for Li Yueming's unconventional decision to promote him, he wouldn't even know what kind of trash he would be. He handed over the 2 most elite teams of the underground world to him. He was prepared to support him to become the new leader of the survivor base. Gu Tianyi did not even know what to say to express his current feelings. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed. "Enough, enough. I, Gu Tianyi, will not let you down." As the branch leader of the exploration team, no one knew better than him how terrifying the most elite forces of the underground world were. After practicing the breathing technique developed by Li Yueming, these team members all had strength that surpassed the limits of human physical fitness. Even ordinary mutated creatures, they could also easily kill with their unreasonably powerful bodies. With their support, Gu Tianyi estimated that even a pig could become the leader of the survivor base. After a short period of preparation, the 2 elite teams of the underground world came out that night. Nearly 500 fully armed members of the team walked in an orderly manner, like a mighty wave of steel heading towards the survivor base. 10 days later, Gu Tianyi arrived at the edge of the fallout shelter base. As soon as he got close, he was discovered by the patrolling guards nearby. Looking at this group of murderous fellows, the patrolling guards did not even dare to fart. They fled in a flash, roaring as they fled. Half a day later, tens of thousands of men from the survivor base surrounded Gu Tianyi with all kinds of crude weapons. The leader, the sons of the 3 leaders, walked out of the crowd. He sized up the army that had appeared out of nowhere and said warily, "Put down your weapons and surrender. I can spare your lives." Even though they were surrounded by tens of thousands of soldiers, the hundreds of people in front of him still did not panic. Looking at them, there was even a faint feeling that they were being taunted. This puzzled the sons of the 3 leaders. But soon, something that caused their pupils to constrict appeared. 500 soldiers parted to the left and right. In the middle, a man who looked similar to them appeared in front of them. The 3 of them looked at each other. Among them, the boss who held the power of the base said, "Who are you? Why are you here?" Gu Tianyi, who had initially thought that his appearance was impressive, suddenly revealed an awkward expression. His brothers had long forgotten about him. Perhaps in their eyes, on that day 3 years ago, it was only an unimportant insect that died, right? But they probably wouldn't even dream of this day. Every dog has its day. One day, A lowly insect like him could also transform into a dragon one day. Gu Tianyi took a deep breath. He suppressed all the emotions that shouldn't have appeared in his heart. His life no longer belonged to him. What he had to do? It was to carry out Li Yueming's orders meticulously. He would do anything for it. At this point, Gu Tianyi's excited expression gradually turned cold. He immediately said coldly, I, Gu Tianyi, am here on the orders of the Son of God of the Star Moon Alliance to take over the position of the leader of the survivor base. Anyone who dares to stop me will be killed without mercy. Chapter 25. Capturing the survivor base, Gu Tianyi with complex emotions. I, Gu Tianyi, am here on the orders of the Son of God of the Star Moon Alliance to take over the position of the leader of the survivor base. Anyone who dares to stop me will be killed without mercy. Gu Tianyi's voice was filled with killing intent. And behind him, the members of the exploration team and the hunter team also silently gripped the weapons in their hands. But no matter how one looked at it, facing the survivor base's nearly 10,000 guards with 500 people was no different from an egg hitting a rock. When hearing Gu Tianyi's words, the three brothers all thought that they were hallucinating. After hearing the name Gu Tianyi, only then did the three brothers' expressions become slightly more solemn. The tall and thin second brother sized Gu Tianyi up. Only then did he realize something. I thought that some amazing big shot had come to our 0911 survivor base. I didn't expect it to be you. The gloomy third brother also smiled and said, Why? You've grown up after not seeing us for 3 years? I think you're not very capable, but you're quite arrogant. You want to covet the position of leader with just a small army? You simply don't know what death looks like. Gu Tianyi looked at his three half-brothers. There was no extra expression on his face. There was only endless coldness. He clenched his fists with one hand. Behind him, the team members drew their weapons when they saw the order. There were no words. The first collision between the surface world and the underground world produced intense sparks. The two sides collided. The three brothers' mocking expressions immediately froze. As the war continued, the three brothers felt a chill run down their spines. The 500 team members all looked like humanoid beasts. Tens of thousands of people from the surface world were like papier-mâché lambs in front of them. After a few rounds, the formation was easily torn apart. Just as the surface world guards' minds were still stiff and at a loss. In the team, Gu Tianyi single-handedly passed everyone and charged towards the three brothers in the center of the crowd. As the sub-captain of the hunter team, Gu Tianyi also learned the breathing technique created by Li Yueming. Now, he was also a part of something powerful. His three brothers, who used to be insufferably arrogant, could not resist him at all. He easily got rid of the three brothers' personal guards. Gu Tianyi did not even bat an eyelid. He raised his hand and slashed down. With one swoop, he beheaded the eldest of the three brothers. Blood splattered everywhere. Many of them were still emitting hot temperatures. The two brothers beside him instantly peed their pants. Trembling, he knelt on the ground and said without thinking, "Fourth brother, we're half-brothers." Gu Tianyi lifted the head of his eldest son and said coldly, "Oh? When you plotted to kill my mother, you never considered me your brother." He ignored the two brothers who were kowtowing on the ground. In the distance, the members of the underground world team were still fighting the surface world guards. However, the current surface world guards had already been killed by the team members. Although there were only 500 of them. But each of them was like a grim reaper from hell, easily reaping their lives. Gu Tianyi knew that the time had come. He stood at a high point. He hung the eldest brother's head on the sword hilt and raised it high. "Everyone, listen up. Gu Tiantang is already dead. As long as all the guards put down their weapons, the Son of God can let bygones be bygones." Hearing this message, The guards who were still resisting turned around in shock. After seeing Gu Tiantang's head hanging on the sword hilt, everyone immediately panicked. The old leader of the survivor base was on his last breath. Gu Tiantang was the leader's eldest son. He was also the son with the highest chance of inheriting the position of leader. Even the new leader's head was hung on the hilt of his sword. When the remaining soldiers saw that the situation was not good, they naturally lost the will to continue fighting. They began to raise their hands in surrender. The members of the underground world stopped killing. After all, they were all humans fighting for different factions. It was easy to have nightmares after killing too many. The 3-year-long struggle for the leadership of the survivor base came to an end. The fourth son of the leader, who had been pronounced dead 3 years ago, suddenly came to life. Moreover, he returned in a domineering manner that no one could imagine. In less than half a day, he had inherited the position of the new leader. All the members of the base raised their hands and feet in agreement. As for those who disagreed, sorry. Their hands and feet were chopped, minced, and fed to the dogs. After everything settled down, Gu Tianyi was brought to the old leader's tent. Looking at his familiar yet unfamiliar father, Gu Tianyi asked, "Do you have anything to say?" The old leader looked at the scarlet blood on his face. He sighed and shook his head. "Since you have nothing to say, it's my turn to ask." Gu Tianyi paused and said, "If I remember correctly, you used to be the city defense captain of Fallout Shelter 0911. The old leader nodded weakly. Gu Tianyi continued to ask, "Have you heard of a person called Zhou Shenhai? He should be a squad leader." The old leader pondered for a long time and finally shook his head. "I knew all the captains of the city defense team at that time. There was no such person." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. The surviving city defense team followed me to the survivor base. The rest died in that disaster." Looking at the suspicious expression on Gu Tianyi's face, the old leader smiled bleakly and said, "Child, if you don't want to believe me, there are documents of the city defense soldiers in that box. You'll know when you look through them." Gu Tianyi nodded. Actually, he was not very interested in this information. However, these questions were specially asked by Li Yueming before he left. He could now obtain a list of the City Defense Forces personnel. It could be considered a satisfactory explanation. When he was done, all the tasks assigned by Li Yueming had basically been completed. Gu Tianyi heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at the old leader lying on the bed. His expression was a little complicated. As a leader, the old man was undoubtedly qualified. He led all the survivors of Shelter 0911 to safety and established this survival base. Shelter 0911 was preserved. But as a father, the old man was a failure. Gu Tianyi, who had never received his father's love since he was young, often felt that he should not have been born. After all, the human world was miserable. If he could not have a happy life, he might as well not be born. It had been a long time. He gritted his teeth in hatred for his biological father. He looked at the dying old man lying on the hospital bed. No matter how much hatred he had in his heart, he could not continue to show it outwardly. The old man seemed to have sensed the struggle in his heart. A few drops of tears flowed from the corner of his muddy eyes. With a hoarse and trembling voice, he said, "Child, now is the moment of life and death for human civilization. The continuation of the hundreds of thousands of survivors of Fallout Shelter 0911 is in your hands." Chapter 26. Crisis appears, attack of mutated creatures. The survival of Fallout Shelter 0911. It was not that important to Gu Tianyi. After all, he had never felt warmth in this land, so where did he come from? In comparison, the Star Moon Alliance with his children and wife was his real home. He looked at the old man on the bed. Gu Tianyi did not say anything. After capturing the survivor base, The alliance's strength expanded further. Under Li Yueming's push, the underground world had begun their migration. They had completely left the sewers, headed to the survivor base and built a new home. There were some minor disturbances. However, they were all suppressed by Li Yueming's Iron Fist methods. The civilizations of the surface world and the underground world collided. Both of them were extremely curious about the unfamiliar neighbor next door. Overall, everything was fine. Nothing happened. Li Yueming's focus was not on these trivial matters. According to Gu Tianyi's report, the survivor base stored numerous documents and information left behind by humans before the cataclysm. Moreover, the location of the base was a good place carefully selected by the old leader. It was adjacent to a pre-cataclysm mining site. As long as it could stabilize and eliminate the mutated creatures in the mining field, human civilization would usher in a period of rapid development. Towards these messy things, Li Yueming basically did not care. As long as the chaos didn't affect him, he would let the cotters of the alliance do whatever they wanted. As for himself, he silently locked himself up. In the next 6 months, the seeds from the old civilization were continuously moved to Li Yueming's residence. Not only were there building blueprints and various secret documents, there were also more than 10 boxes of various firearms blueprints. These were all treasures. Now that he had the breathing technique, ordinary humans could also obtain strength that exceeded the limits through training. However, compared to those mutated creatures that were constantly evolving, the speed at which humans strengthened their bodies through training was still too slow. If he could digest these blueprints, the overall combat power of the underground world would rise to another dimension. Upon receipt of such information and documentation, Li Yueming did not show up at the Alliance headquarters for more than half a year. During this period, almost everything was handled by Wang Fei and Li Qiao. That's right. Li Qiao, who was only 8 years old, was also a genius. She had super intelligence and decisiveness that did not match her age. When she was 6 years old, Li Qiao passed the examination set by the teachers of the Alliance with full marks for all subjects. She was the student who graduated the earliest with the best exam results in the entire underground world since the establishment of education. Now, she had already entered the core circle. Although the identity as Li Yueming's sister had provided her with a lot of convenience, however, her own ability was obvious. Fortunately, this wasn't the first time Li Yueming had locked himself into study. In addition, the development of the Alliance was already on the right track. Alliance members know their duties. The hunters hunt and the educators teach. There was basically no trouble. 2 years passed in a flash. Li Yueming was 21 years old. When he first entered seclusion to study, Li Yueming basically didn't see anyone. Until a year later, Li Qiao came over. Only then did Li Yueming give her the many military weapon designs he had deduced. However, he still did not leave the house. Li Qiao was not very happy. However, she was no longer like the ignorant brat when she was young. Her brother was now shouldering the hope of the entire human civilization. It was no longer possible to touch her head and tell her those strange myths like when she was young. With Li Yueming's continuous supply of technology, not only had the Star-Moon Alliance's development speed not slowed down in the past few years. Instead, it was getting faster and faster. Just last year, Wang Fei organized a hunter team to clean up the mutated creatures on the mine. After a year of crazy cleaning, the hunter team finally wiped out all the mutated creatures on the surface of the mine a year later. The Alliance began to organize people to mine and smelt ores. Moreover, he had achieved some results half a year ago. Everything in the Alliance seemed to be developing in a good direction. But everyone knew all of this was just the serenity on the surface. The real danger has yet to arrive. On this day 2 years later, Li Yueming continued his deduction in his room as usual. But at this moment, suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Li Yueming got up and opened the door. However, Wang Fei said with a tense expression, "Teacher, something big has happened." Li Yueming's expression immediately turned cold as he asked, "What's wrong?" Beads of sweat appeared on Wang Fei's face. After taking 2 deep breaths, he said, "It's a long story. I want to invite you to the conference room immediately to preside over the situation." Li Yueming did not say anything else. He turned around and returned to his room to change his clothes before saying, "Lead the way." Wang Fei nodded and quickly jogged ahead. The two quickly arrived at the central meeting room. The moment he pushed open the door, the originally noisy meeting room suddenly fell silent. The members looked at Li Yueming, whose expression was normal. There was an unprecedented sense of security in the air. No matter when, no matter how much they had grown, Li Yueming would always be the backbone of the alliance. He was the soul of the Star-Moon Alliance. The moment he arrived, the soul of the entire Star-Moon Alliance returned. An usher led the way through the surrounding subordinates. He took his seat in the conference room. After sitting down, Li Yueming's deep gaze slowly swept across everyone. Everyone felt his gaze on them. All the members in the meeting room could not help but raise their heads, straighten their backs, and stand up straight. It had been 2 years since they last met. Everyone hoped to show their best attitude in front of Li Yueming. In the end, it landed on Li Qiao, who had already grown into a little girl. He waved at the little girl. Li Qiao, who was already 10 years old, stuck out her mischievous tongue and trotted over behind Li Yueming with an obedient expression. He looked at the silent central conference room. Li Yueming slowly said, "Tell me, what happened?" Only then did the group come back to their senses. Someone quickly came up with a simple summary of events. After summarizing the cause and effect of the matter, he said, "Teacher, several of our transport teams that were transporting minerals were attacked by unknown creatures. The other party took our goods and strung the corpses of the transport team members on trees. When the exploration team went to investigate, they found many humanoid footprints that were smaller than humans." Chapter 27. Retract and hang yourself for 100 years. Li Yueming's expression slowly turned solemn. Everyone knew that almost all the humans around Fallout Shelter 0911 were under the command of the Star-Moon Alliance. It was impossible for other survivors to be active in the wilderness. As such, the enemy who attacked the transport team was obvious. Most of them were mutated creatures from Fallout Shelter 0911. Judging from the footprints of the humanoid creature, the attacker was most likely a mid-level mutated creature with a very complete evolution level. According to the 0911 Survivors Alliance, currently, the mutated creatures in the world are divided into 3 levels. The lowest level mutated creature showed that after absorbing the strange substance, its body had undergone various mutations that ordinary people could not understand. Other than being more irritable, their physique and strength had increased greatly. In the end, it still belonged to the category of wild beasts. Most of the mutated creatures that the Alliance had come into contact with after coming to the surface were these low-level mutated creatures. As for the mid-level mutated creatures that had evolved more perfectly, they had evolved intelligence on the basis of low-level mutated creatures. Among them, the smartest intermediate-level creatures could even display intelligence comparable to ordinary humans. Moreover, most of the mid-level mutated creatures had evolved with human characteristics. For example, after the giant snake evolved into a second-grade mutated creature, a considerable portion of it had a human head and a snake body. It could only be said that it was fortunate that there were no myths or legends about snakes in this world. Otherwise, there might really be people who were so mesmerized by the snake demon that they could not walk. As for high-level mutated creatures, such an existence had almost lost the characteristics of a beast. If the other party did not want to show it, Even a normal human would not be able to tell. That was not the only terrifying thing about high-level mutated creatures. They were infected by the strangeness and had almost perfect physiques. Each individual could bury mountains and overturn seas. It had the strength to make ordinary humans tremble. It was extremely difficult for such a high-level life form to evolve. Even among the mutated creatures, such existences were extremely rare. In addition, there is a category above these three categories. That was the royal family. It was rumored that there were a total of 8 royal families. They were the first creatures to evolve after the violent explosion. Among them, each of the 8 royal clans had evolved into a unique innate ability. Their existence was a well-deserved nightmare for humans. The transport team might have encountered mid-level mutated creatures. Moreover, it was an organized and premeditated ambush. This wave of attacks was very ruthless. Not only did it kill nearly 100 members of the transport team, it also directly caused the mining and smelting industry of the entire alliance to stop production. That was why the upper echelons were so furious. He rubbed his chin. Li Yueming looked at Wang Fei and asked, "Has the exploration team checked?" Wang Fei nodded. "Of course." However, other than a series of messy footprints, the enemy did not leave any additional traces. Li Yueming thought for a moment and didn't say anything else. Instead, he changed the topic. "How much steel have you gathered?" In the past 2 years, the Star Moon Alliance had collected steel on a large scale. In addition to the necessary tools and weapons, almost all the steel in the entire territory was forcefully confiscated. It was stored in an extremely hidden warehouse. Hearing Li Yueming's question, Wang Fei glanced at it, lowered his head, and reported a number. Li Yueming frowned. This steel in storage was less than he had imagined. It was not time to give up on the iron ore in the south. He made a decision. Li Yueming said, "Send the Scarlet Squad to patrol the mine. They will escort the ore back to the base." Hearing Li Yueming's order, all the members present looked surprised. The Scarlet Squad was a newly formed team formed by the Star Moon Alliance in the second half of last year. Its members were all the strongest experts carefully selected from the Hunter team and the Exploration team. There were less than 200 people in the entire team. It was the trump card in the entire Star Moon Alliance. Except for Li Yueming. No one could command the Scarlet Squad. In order to enter the mountains to continue mining, Li Yueming did not hesitate to send out the Scarlet Squad. This was something that no one had expected. Below the stage, some of the higher UPS did not quite understand this. In the end, he mustered his courage and asked, "Teacher, although the mine is very important, isn't it a little too much to send out the Scarlet Squad for this?" The other members nodded in agreement. They all said, "That's right. Even if it's a mid-level mutated creature, we can send 2 exploration teams." Li Yueming glanced at them. He smiled and said, "Don't be anxious. You'll understand after watching it slowly. This game has just begun." At this point, Li Yueming paused. He did not give them any time to react. With a wave of his hand, he said again, "Pass down the order. From today onwards, other than the logistics team that guarantees daily expenses, all troops will urgently shrink and start building city walls and fortifications." Almost 90% of the upper echelons in the Star Moon Alliance could not believe their ears. Only a small number of people were prepared for this. After everyone dispersed, Li Qiao, who was standing behind Li Yueming, had a solemn expression. As the publicly acknowledged little genius of the Star Moon Alliance, after 2 years of training, Li Qiao already knew everything about the alliance like the back of her hand. There were many things that Li Yueming could hide from others. But he could not hide it from her. In fact, many of Li Yueming's arrangements were personally handled by her. The attack of the mid-level mutated creatures was like the first wave of a tsunami. The waves had arrived. Could the real monstrous waves be far away? Seeing that the other members had all left, Li Qiao sighed. She asked worriedly, "Brother, will the day still come?" Li Yueming rubbed the little girl's soft hair and said gently, "Those mutated creatures know our every move like the back of their hands. That's why I said that this day would come sooner or later. It's already beyond my expectations that we lasted out this long." As he spoke, Li Yueming teased, "Why? Are you afraid?" Li Qiao waved her petite fist and said, "I'm the reincarnation of Emperor Vicious. How can I be afraid?" Li Yueming couldn't help but flick her head. "Then why?" The smile on the little girl's face suddenly disappeared slowly. There was a rare seriousness in her eyes. Their eyes met. Li Qiao said word by word, "I just hate that I haven't grown up and can't help you much." Hearing this, Li Yueming also looked away. Actually, at this moment, he really wanted to pull his sensible sister into his arms. However, the remaining rationality in his heart reminded him that he could not do this in this life. As the leader of the Star-Moon Alliance, Li Yueming felt that he had a clear conscience. As his sister's brother, as the teacher of the students, as the son of his parents, he was undoubtedly a failure. However, at this moment, he was like an old leader. He could only turn his head away. He smiled and said perfunctorily, "Your existence is my best cure for all my worries. When you grow up, I still have to rely on you to take care of me." Li Qiao ignored his words. She was still staring at him. There was a long pause. The little girl suddenly hugged his arm and said uneasily, "Brother, you will win like before, right? This time." Li Yueming finally did not dodge. He patted her head gently and said seriously, "Don't worry, I will build a world with stars and the moon for you. At that time, no one will have to worry about tomorrow." The girl raised her head innocently. He stuck out his little finger and said, "Then you must do it. Pinky swear, hang yourself. You're not allowed to change for 100 years. Chapter 28. Meeting Zhou Wuhei again, how many points can you give for this punch? After Li Qiao left, Li Yueming returned to his usual cold demeanor. The entire Star-Moon Alliance began to tremble. Honestly, if not for Li Yueming's absolute faith in the Alliance and all the residents, the few instructions he announced at the meeting were absolutely impossible to achieve. With unprecedented cohesion, the Alliance actually followed the command. First, they sent the Scarlet Squad to the mining area to escort and transport various ores. Compared to other orders, this one was the easiest to complete. Less than 2 hours after the meeting, the Scarlet Squad, armed to the teeth, set off. Almost at the same time, the mine also received instructions to continue mining. They will be responsible for collecting and transporting minerals for a long time to come. On the other side, the Alliance began to gather the grassroots branches of the Alliance in the various regions. Li Yueming's instructions were then relayed from door to door by members who had been stationed at the branch all year round. The next day, in the entire Alliance, other than the necessary logistic eons, almost everyone gathered outside the headquarters. Some of them were refugees who had followed Li Yueming since the underground world. Some of them were residents of Shelter 0911. Now, they all had new identities. They went through the door-to-door statistics of the grassroots branch. Be it the refugees from the underground world or the survivors from the surface world, they were all registered. They also had the same identity card. They were collectively known as citizens of the Star-Moon Alliance and the Human Federation. It was also the first time they had gathered together with this new identity. The man known as the Son of God on the high platform slowly stood still. All the citizens cheered. "Long live the Son of God!" Li Yueming took out a crudely made loudspeaker and coughed twice. "Everyone, I have bad news for you. The mutated creatures have discovered our existence. The 100,000 people below the stage instantly fell silent. The refugees in the underground world were fine. After all, they had lived in the underground world and had never seen the horror of mutated creatures with their own eyes. However, the survivors from Fallout Shelter 0911 were all terrified. No one knew better than them how terrifying mutated creatures were. Its strongest expert was even as tall as a city wall. Ordinary humans were like small bugs in front of them. It posed no threat at all. Originally, they thought that they could avoid the threat of mutated creatures under the protection of the Star-Moon Alliance. Unexpectedly, in the end, they were still targeted by the mutated creatures. The audience was in an uproar. Many citizens could not help but discuss. Li Yueming was not surprised and continued, "I know what you're thinking. It's nothing more than how to escape and survive, but please think carefully. Behind you are your wives, children, and friends. If you take a step back now, it means that everything you have will no longer exist. Our homeland will be trampled on, our wives and daughters will be killed, and our friends and family will be separated. Therefore, please abandon the idea of escaping. Fight the enemy together with me and all the members of the Star-Moon Alliance. In this battle, we will fight the mutated creatures to the death." After saying all this, instead, it gave all the residents enough time to consider. What followed was an incomparably tragic war. Even if Li Yueming had the heaven-defying talent of infinite deduction. However, in front of the absolute power of the mutated creatures, sacrifices were inevitable. Forced conscription is absolutely necessary. Instead of burying minds for future battles, Li Yueming was more inclined to explain the cause and effect from the beginning. Only these hundreds of thousands of people were sincerely acting for the people they wanted to protect. Only then could the Star-Moon Alliance have a chance of survival in a long battle. After a long silence, the crowd began to bustle with angry roars. These voices were like a flag in the darkness. Soon, it caused a prairie fire. In the Star-Moon Alliance square, the shouts of the crowd gradually turned into one word. Fight! 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 Li Yueming was 21 years old. Standing on the high platform, he looked like a real god. Everyone began to build various fortifications 24 hours a day. Li Yueming no longer hid anything. He brought out all the military building blueprints he had deduced in the past 2 years. Even many of the members did not know about this. It turned out that there was actually a large number of steel bars and cement hidden in the warehouse of the Alliance. These were all secretly made by Li Yueming through Li Qiao. The level of confidentiality was very high. Even Wang Fei had only heard a little about it, but he did not know the exact situation. All of this came in handy. So much work. The entire alliance started to spin like a top. In such a tense situation, as the leader, Li Yueming came to a house in casual clothes. He knocked on the door. The majestic Zhou Wuhei soon walked out of the house. He looked at Li Yueming in front of him. After a long silence, Zhou Wuhei asked, "When did you find out?" Li Yueming thought seriously for a long time and said, I don't think I trusted you from the beginning, right?" Zhou Wuhei. Originally, he thought that he had hidden himself well. Li Yueming had never trusted him at all. But now, there seemed to be no point in talking about this anymore. He looked at the young man in front of him. Zhou Wuhei cracked a smile and said, "It's too boring to swallow a delicacy that has been nurtured for so long." Li Yueming also twisted his neck. "Looks like the lesson I taught you a few years ago wasn't enough." The smile on Zhou Wuhei's face froze. His gaze toward Li Yueming finally revealed a strong killing intent. "He, do you think you're very strong? If it weren't for the sake of better observation, I would have crushed you to death at that time." He picked up a fist the size of a sandbag. One punch. Zhou Wuhei was sent flying. He fell to the ground like a meteor. The incomparably powerful force even smashed a huge hole in the ground. He looked at Zhou Wuhei's bulging body in the pit. Li Yueming blew the dust off his fist and said, "How is it? How many points can you give for this punch?" Chapter 29. Who's the real monster? After so many years, Li Yueming finally bared his fangs again. It was just one punch. In an instant, Zhou Wuhei was sent flying more than 10 meters away. It landed on the ground, raising a cloud of dust. Zhou Wuhei lay on the ground and coughed twice. After a while, he slowly got up from the bottom of the pit. He looked at the calm Li Yueming not far away. Zhou Wuhei sighed and said, "I have to say, as a human, you are really special." Hair began to grow on Zhou Wuhei's body. His entire body swelled up. Its nearly 2-meter tall body transformed into a 10-meter tall giant rat in less than a few seconds. Seeing this, Li Yueming could not help but click his tongue in wonder. As a mutated creature, you're quite special yourself. Ever since he found out that the underground world was a prison, Li Yueming had doubts about Zhou Wuhei's identity. After all, the timing of Zhou Wuhei's appearance was too coincidental. In the subsequent investigation, Li Yueming could not find Zhou Wuhei's name in the 0911 shelter survivors' data. Zhou Wuhei's identity was obvious. However, at that time, Zhou Wuhei did not show any substantial threat. In order to gain more time to develop, Li Yueming did not expose the other party's identity. It just so happened that Li Yueming needed a whetstone to test his actual combat strength. The battle between the mutated creatures and the Star Moon Alliance was about to begin. It was time to settle Zhou Wuhei's score. After transforming into a giant rat, Zhou Wuhei said proudly, "I'm one of the members of the royal family under the Rat King. Of course I'm special." Li Yueming just smiled. He clenched his fist and said, "Actually, what I mean is that as a rat, you seem to be especially fat." He looked at the undisguised mockery on the young man's face not far away. Zhou Wuhei, who originally wanted to maintain his elegant posture as a high-level race, instantly flew into a rage. As a noble royal family, being demoted to such a god-forsaken place was enough to make him angry. He was actually despised by a little bug. Zhou Wuhei could not take it anymore. The expansion of his body suddenly accelerated. Zhou Wuhei raised his sharp claws and clawed at Li Yueming. At this moment, he had already changed beyond recognition. He had turned into a mutated giant rat with red eyes. There were only a few places that still had kept the appearance of humans. It could switch forms between human and rat. This meant that Zhou Wuhei's genes had been modified perfectly. It was at least a high-level mutated creature. It was an extremely difficult existence to deal with. Swish. The ear-piercing sound was getting closer and closer to Li Yueming. Zhou Wuhei's giant claw descended like a small mountain. It could be imagined that if he was hit by this attack, Li Yueming would lose a layer of skin even if he did not die. Li Yueming stepped back with his right leg and barely dodged the attack of the giant claw. He circulated the breathing technique. Li Yueming's entire body began to emit scorching heat. After countless improvements, the current star breathing technique was vastly different from the original version. Not only could he squeeze out more power, it could also save more stamina. On the basis of the breathing technique, Li Yueming had also developed moves that were specifically used to kill and injure enemies. Each of these moves was extremely lethal and perfectly matched the breathing technique. The two complemented each other. As a result, Li Yueming's combat strength was no longer the same as before. After his body was adjusted to its optimal state, Li Yueming exerted a little force. The next moment, he shot toward Zhou Wuhei like a cannonball. Looking at Li Yueming's sudden terrifying speed, Zhou Wuhei's pupils constricted. He finally put away the contempt in his heart and began to become serious. The man and beast exchanged a few blows in the blink of an eye. Li Yueming found an opportunity to punch Zhou Wuhei in the back. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zhou Wuhei took a deep breath. The originally thick fur actually grew a layer of scales that looked like a shield. The force of Li Yueming's fist was blocked by this layer of scale armor that suddenly grew out. The vibrations from the scales still made Zhou Wuhei feel pain. Was this a physique that humans could possess? He looked at Li Yueming, who was like a ghost not far away. Zhou Wuhei once again felt suspicious of his beast life. He forcefully suppressed the strange feeling in his heart. Zhou Wuhei sneered, "Don't forget that I've also learned the breathing technique you developed." In fact, other than the fact that staying in the lifeless underground world made him a little bored, the most important reason why Zhou Wuhei had not taken any action was because he wanted to find out the secret Li Yueming was hiding. But to his surprise, in just a few years, this bug that was originally nothing to be afraid of had actually grown to such an extent. Zhou Wuhei nodded. A strange smile suddenly appeared on Li Yueming's face. He said with a faint smile, "It seems that the information about you mutated creatures is not completely accurate. Perhaps you have reached the same level of intelligence as humans. But when it comes to schemes and plots, you bunch of newly enlightened beasts are still too inexperienced." Before Zhou Wuhei could figure out what they meant, however, he realized that the originally thick scales on his body were rapidly turning red. A few seconds later, it even began to melt. Li Yueming revealed his white teeth and explained kindly, "I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. This breathing technique of mine can only be used by humans. If other life forms rashly use it, their bodies might suffer varying degrees of damage." After saying that, while Zhou Wuhei's head was still buzzing, Li Yueming instantly rushed in front of him and punched out fiercely, "Today, let me tell you what a real humanoid monster is. The first form of the star-breathing technique, splitting mountains and parting seas." The muscles on Li Yueming's entire arm began to move rhythmically. He gathered all his strength and punched Zhou Wuhei's abdomen. There was a crisp crack and the sound of bones breaking. Zhou Wuhei's fur and muscles were trembling. This punch, Li Yueming had broken no less than 5 of his ribs. He felt intense pain. Zhou Wuhei raised his head and let out an ear-piercing screech. At the same time, his body, which had already lost its control, subconsciously counterattacked. In Li Yueming's opinion, an attack of this level was not a threat at all. After easily dodging, Li Yueming's sandbag-sized fist rained down again. Zhou Wuhei roared in anger. Such a huge commotion naturally attracted the attention of the alliance. Many members who had heard the commotion rushed over. However, the first to approach the scene was a group of soldiers who had recently been recruited for training. They looked at the mutated giant rat not far away. The recruits immediately thought that they were hallucinating. One had to know that this was the headquarters of the Star Moon Alliance. How could there be high-level mutated creatures? It was not easy to come back to his senses. Only then did the group of rookies realize that what was even more unbelievable was yet to come. Li Yueming, who had always appeared in front of them as an otaku, was now punching them hard. He was pressing the high-level mutated rat to the ground and beating it up. Holy shit! That person is the son of God. Can someone tell me if this is really happening? F***ck, why did you hit me? F***ck, it hurts. It's really not an illusion. It's over. I feel like my worldview has exploded. He looked at the brutal scene not far away. All the Alliance members who came to check on the situation felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Damn it, who was the real monster? Chapter 30. The final reunion is about to begin. Under the joint witness of the Star Moon Alliance members, Li Yueming punched Zhou Wuhei's transformed giant rat into meat paste. After confirming that he had really died among the mutated creatures, the attack power of the giant rats was not strong. Its skill points were all used to quickly reproduce and live tenaciously. Even though Li Yueming was beating Zhou Wuhei up, it also took a lot of effort to completely kill it. Amidst the bloody mess, Li Yueming stood up. Wang Fei, who had heard the news, had already prepared toiletries and new clothes for him. Li Yueming waved his hand and said, "Send this corpse to the research lab and keep it safe." Wang Fei nodded. He looked at Li Yueming with uncontrollable admiration. His teacher would always be a legend that no one could look up to. Just like the shining sun in the darkness. A year passed in the blink of an eye. Li Yueming was 22 years old. The conflict between the Alliance and the mutated creatures became more and more intense. There were dozens of small-scale battles along the mine's transportation routes and hunting team routes. They both suffered losses. As the aura of war became stronger, the entire alliance became more and more compact. The workers who built the fortifications worked 24 hours a day. Many of them were too lazy to sleep. When they were tired, they would find a place to lie down for a while. After waking up and eating something, they would hurry back to the construction. These were all self-initiated organizations by the people. In addition to distributing food regularly and checking the progress, there were almost no supervisors. It wasn't that the Alliance members didn't value fortifications. It was just that the Alliance was too busy. Every member wished they could learn the clone technique and split themselves in half. There was really no extra manpower to manage. The defense project was still advancing at a relatively fast speed. Under the continuous work of tens of thousands of strong laborers, high walls rose from the ground. The people spontaneously organized themselves to maintain the stability of the construction site and checked if the construction quality was qualified. As long as they found any cutting corners, they would immediately order the construction to be rebuilt. Such a united scene would probably only appear at such a critical moment. For the sake of his wife and children and his own life, no one dared to act carelessly. As the leader of the Star Moon Alliance, Li Yueming was naturally not idle during this year. After killing Zhou Wuhe, Li Yueming began to study the cells of mutated life forms. Actually, he had tried this a long time ago. However, the conditions at that time were limited. As a result, no meaningful results have been achieved. But now, the battle was about to begin. The entire alliance had already done their best for this. But Li Yueming knew. Facing the tide of the mutated beasts, even if 100,000 players were wiped out, they wouldn't have any chance of winning. It was just a question of how long he could last. As for Li Yueming himself, he had to find a breakthrough before the alliance was broken through. Only humans had a chance to win. Li Yueming walked out of the research lab. He shook off all the guards. He ran to the bathroom alone to wash up. Then, he went to find Li Qiao and prepared to bring her home. Their real home had long been abandoned in the dark underground. Their parents had already moved to the surface world. Li Qiao would make time to come back every 10 days to half a month. However, Li Yueming had not returned home for several years. When he arrived at his home on the surface world, the thin woman was drying earthworms in the small courtyard. The moment she saw the two of them, the earthworms in the woman's hands scattered all over the ground. She sized up Li Yueming in disbelief. After confirming that she did not recognize the wrong person, only then did tears fall. She held Li Yueming's hand and rubbed it repeatedly for a moment before saying with a trembling voice, "Child, you're back." Li Yueming rubbed his nose. Compared to the past, the woman had obviously aged a lot. Fortunately, she still looked healthy. This also made the guilt in Li Yueming's heart lessen a little. He turned his head. Li Yueming said unnaturally, "I specially took some time out today to have a meal with you guys." The woman took 2 steps back. She sized up Li Yueming again. After confirming that the person in front of her was really her son, only then did she smile through her tears. "All right, all right, all right. Wait at home for a while. I'll call the old man back now." Now, the entire alliance was filled with soldiers. However, as Li Yueming's parents, Even if the two elders lay down every day and did not work, probably no one would dare to cause trouble. However, his father admitted that he could not help his son much. Therefore, they decided to go and build fortifications with their fellow villagers. The people at the side could not stop them. In the evening, Li Yueming and his family of 4 sat at the dining table. He looked at his handsome son in front of him. His father got up and went to the backyard to search. A moment later, he actually brought back a pot of wine from the courtyard. Ever since he moved to the surface world, the Alliance already had the ability to brew small-scale wine. However, this thing was very strictly controlled. He wondered where his cheapskate father had gotten it from. He poured a glass of wine for Li Yueming. He refilled his glass. He picked up his wine glass and took a sip before sighing. "You've grown up." Li Yueming also raised his glass and drank it in one gulp. But he didn't say anything. His father was usually not very smart. However, for some reason, he was exceptionally alert today. From the beginning to the end, he did not ask or say anything. The father and son drank one glass after another. He drank until he was a little dizzy. The old man took Li Yueming's hand and said while reeking of alcohol, "Kid, you're almost 23 years old this year. When are you going to find a wife?" The thin woman took advantage of the situation and said, "I know you're busy with work. When you get married and have a grandson, bring him for us." Li Yueming could not help but smile bitterly. In the entire Star Moon Alliance, only these two people could mention this in front of him. The others probably wouldn't dare to say anything about this even if they had guts. Seeing her brother suffer, Li Qiao couldn't help but purse her lips and laugh. The few of them drank and ate. The atmosphere was harmonious. It was as if they had temporarily returned to a peaceful society where humans could still dominate the world a long time ago. However, good times were always short. At night, Li Yueming and Li Qiao prepared to leave. After all, the entire Star Moon Alliance was in a critical period. Li Yueming and Li Qiao were both the highest decision-makers with absolute authority. Things like disappearing from the face of the earth would definitely cause chaos as time passed. His father, who was already sound asleep, suddenly woke up. He stood up and stopped the two people who were about to leave. Although he was still drunk. However, he still tried his best to enunciate clearly, "Children, do whatever you want. No matter what, this is your home. Your mother and I are proud of the two of you." The old man shuffled back to the table. After burping, he lay down and continued to sleep. It was as if nothing had happened. Chapter 31. The first round of the final battle, Endless Rats. After leaving the old man's house, everything seemed to be back on track. On the way, Li Yueming summarized his achievements in the past 2 years. Other than dissecting the corpses of mutated creatures for research, Li Yueming had also been using infinite deductions to learn the various blueprints and information transported from Fallout Shelter 0911. It also produced all kinds of scientific research results. This allowed the technology of the Alliance to develop rapidly. Although it was still far from the peak of human civilization's technology. However, other than a few top-notch advanced technologies, most of the others had already reached the same level. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had forcefully raised the technological level of the entire human race after the cataclysm. To meet the growing demand for food, the earthworm-scale cultivation base had also expanded at least 50 times in the past 2 years. New vegetable and poultry farms were also built. He had basically achieved food self-sufficiency. For the impending danger, this preparation was still too little. It was far from enough to deal with this life or death crisis. Unfortunately, time waited for no one. In a few more years, the entire Star Moon Alliance might be completely different. That night, at 3:30 a.m., everything was silent. Everyone ended their busy day. A deafening drum beat came from outside the city wall. Hearing voices, everyone in the alliance quickly woke up from their slumber. After a short daze, almost everyone's faces turned pale. The meaning of such rapid and violent drum beats could not be clearer. 10 minutes later, all the troops had gathered. Because the situation was urgent. Therefore, the gathering venue was chosen to be in the square in the middle of the headquarters. The blazing torch illuminated the entire night sky. Under the torch, all the soldiers dressed in special soft armor had their eyes dyed red. Wang Fei stood outside Li Yueming's wooden house and gently knocked on the door. Unexpectedly, the door was not locked. He hesitated for a moment. Wang Fei pushed open the door and walked in. However, Li Yueming did not seem to be sleeping at all. He was sitting on a chair by the window-sill in a daze, silently watching the gradually slanting moonlight in the room. Hearing the sound, Li Yueming stood up and said calmly, "Let's go." Only then did Wang Fei notice that he had already put on his armor. Half an hour later, Li Yueming and the others appeared on the wall of Star Moon Alliance's defense circle 001. The silver moon in the sky was hazy. However, at this moment, a black cloud blocked the moonlight. It cast a large shadow on the ground. Or rather, the ground was not entirely covered in shadows. Instead, it was a wave of countless mutated rats. After 2 years of tireless efforts, currently, 3 complete defensive circles and 12 special checkpoints have been built outside the alliance. It was enough to withstand the attacks of hundreds of thousands of mutated creatures. However, there were probably nearly 1 million rats in front of him, hiding in the shadows. Just a glance was enough to make everyone's scalp tingle. Many survivors of Fallout Shelter 0911 recalled the fear of being dominated by an endless rat tide. Squeak squeak squeak. Among the rats, an exceptionally huge rat screamed. The black mass of rats began to move. They quickly rushed towards the city wall. On the city wall, the soldiers forcefully suppressed the fear in their hearts. Trembling, they took out machine guns from the military supplies box under their feet. Although they were very afraid, no one chose to escape. Because behind them was the wife and children they wanted to protect. If they retreat, what awaited them was the end of their families. Among them, many survivors had already experienced the feeling of abandoning their families and children. Now that life had finally stabilized and they lived a happy life, nobody wanted to experience it a second time. After assembling the machine gun, just in time, the dark clouds that covered the moon dissipated at this moment. The moon poked its head out again, illuminating everything on the surface. The heavy machine gun that Li Yueming personally modified began to fire. 222. Continuous gunshots sounded. The air on the entire city wall was filled with the pungent smell of gunpowder. The bullets fired from the barrel hit the mutated rat. Immediately, scarlet blood bloomed like flowers. The dead mutated rats were quickly stepped on by their companions. In an instant, it was turned into a pile of meat paste. Under the bright moonlight, it looked abnormally mournful. This batch of rats seemed to be very powerful. But in fact, they were all made up of low-level mutated rats. Other than being more terrifying than ordinary rats, there was not much difference. Ordinary heavy machine guns were enough to deal with it. Li Yueming only circled around the city wall. He went back into the research institute. He continued to dissect the mutated life form's corpse. He carried out all kinds of research almost without sleep. He gave Wang Fei full authority to decide on all matters on the outermost battlefield. Unless they were attacked by mutated creatures outside the inner city, Li Yueming did not care about anything else. Time always flies in war. Half a month later, on the city wall's outer fortifications, the machine guns were brought up in batches, and in a few days, they were carried down in batches. Even if it was a machine gun designed by Li Yueming himself. All kinds of performances were extremely stable. However, it could not withstand being fired for 24 hours a day. In order to achieve the highest killing efficiency, often, a soldier had to alternately fire 2 machine guns. After he finished blasting one, he switched to another machine gun. There were still countless damaged machine guns. The soldiers stationed there were already numb to this. They did not know how many rats they had killed or how many cartridges they had used up. He only knew that the rats outside the city wall were really like a tide in the sea, repelling wave after wave. Endless. It was not easy to endure until the defense changed. Many soldiers did not even need to get up. They usually fell asleep on the spot. Many of them fell asleep and would never wake up again. One could imagine how intense this battle was. What made everyone feel even more despair? Currently, the rats were only mobilizing low-level groups. The middle and high level had yet to attack. After discovering this, almost all the Star Moon Alliance's members were shrouded in a thick layer of gloom. Chapter 32. For a beautiful tomorrow. There seemed to be no end to the vast and boundless rat dynasty. Fortunately, the Star Moon Alliance's barrier was strong enough. Even the ground was poured with steel bars and soil foundations that were more than 10 meters deep. They could still resist the attack of the rat tide for the time being. Wang Fei and Li Qiao almost never came out of the war room. They were on duty 24 hours a day. It was also because of their flawless cooperation. Only now did the entire alliance not have any trouble. Although the hearts of all the members were extremely heavy. But at least the entire alliance was still operating in an orderly manner. 3 months passed in a flash. The Star Moon Alliance destroyed the last machine gun. The bullets were all cleared. Looking at the corpses all over the ground outside the city wall, everyone had complicated expressions on their faces. This was the most intense battle since the Star Moon Alliance was established. Although no single mutated rat passed the defensive wall. However, there were no less than 100 exhausted soldiers. They had paid such a huge price. The rats were only pushed back a few meters. After a short reorganization, the rats continued to charge forward fearlessly. Standing on the city wall, Wang Fei could not help but sigh when he saw this situation. All the soldiers stood up. He looked at the defense line under his feet with a complicated expression. Here. They fought with all their might. It had been guarded by nearly 10,000 machine guns for 3 months. He still could not stop the fate of failure. All the soldiers in the outer circle retreated to the second defensive circle. As the gunpowder buried in the middle of the city wall exploded, the originally sturdy outer city wall collapsed. The Star Moon Alliance's first line of defense was completely gone. On the second line of defense, the more elite members of the Hunter team were ready to attack. They started a new round of battle with the rats. Just as everyone thought that everything would settle down again, a giant rat that was 7 to 8 meters tall suddenly attacked the northwest city wall. A huge hole was made in it. Fortunately, the members of the Hunter team were all elites among elites. They discovered the commotion on the city wall in time. That was why the losses were kept to a minimum. This episode scared many people into breaking out in cold sweat. After 3 months of manpower tactics, many soldiers had even forgotten that there was an even more terrifying higher level among the rats. It was just a thought. The giant rat almost seized the opportunity to break through the second line of defense. The frightened soldiers increased their patrols at night. The rats tried several times. After realizing that they could not break through the defense line this way, they quickly lost their patience. Half a year after the first attack of the rat dynasty, traces of mid-level mutated rats began to appear in the flesh. Mid-level mutated rats had stronger vitality. Ordinary attacks would at most injure him. Only the Star rocket cannon designed by Li Qiao could destroy it in one strike. However, mid-level mutated rats had higher intelligence. After suffering a few losses, As long as it saw a rocket launcher aimed at it from the city wall, it immediately turned around and fled. This almost roguish harassment caused the soldiers extreme pain. They had to spare manpower at any time. It was to guard against the sudden appearance of mid-level mutated rats. But after a day, the gains were often few and far between. There were not many rocket launcher shells. Before he had absolute confidence in killing the giant rat. To save shells, the gunners could only watch helplessly. As time passed, the Star-Moon Alliance was also in an increasingly dangerous situation. A few times, the rats even climbed up the wall of the second line of defense. It was a group of 13 or 14-year-old children who poured down buckets of cooking oil to resolve the crisis. What is edible oil? It was rations for the humans guarding the rear. They were forced to spill oil to help out. It was enough to show that the alliance had been pushed to the corner by the mutated creatures. A year after the battle began, the Star-Moon Alliance once again gave up on the second defensive circle. They prepared to retreat to the core circle to make their final resistance. This retreat, the alliance had paid the price of blood. On the way back, Wang Fei lost an arm. The entire hunter team of several thousand elites was almost completely wiped out. As for the reason, it was simple. When Wang Fei gave the order to retreat, more than 10 different rats suddenly rushed out from the group of rats below the city wall. On the surface, they were no different from ordinary mutated rats. However, they were actually disguised by a few high-level rats. These rats were hidden among ordinary rats. After approaching the city wall, it suddenly attacked and opened a gap as quickly as possible. As a result, many members of the hunter team who had yet to retreat were caught off guard and died tragically. Even Wang Fei almost died. In the end, the members of the hunter team protected him with their lives. The doctor had just bandaged Wang Fei's wound. Wang Fei stood up and gave himself 2 tight slaps. Then, he burst into tears. It was not easy for him to calm down. Wang Fei knelt on the ground and chased away everyone who tried to help him up. He knelt all the way to Li Yueming's wooden house. He looked at the closed door. Wang Fei kowtowed a few times and said in a trembling voice, "Teacher, I'm sorry. I've disappointed you again." There was no movement in the house for a long time. After a long time, Li Yueming opened the door. Looking at the empty sleeve in Wang Fei's left hand, he closed his eyes and said, "You've already done very well." Wang Ye could no longer control his emotions. He broke down and wailed. His voice was heart-wrenching. As he cried, he couldn't help but slap herself. Why didn't I prepare in advance? Why am I still alive? Why? When the surrounding alliance members saw this situation, they fell silent. Actually, everyone knew that this was not Wang Fei's fault. After all, no one could have predicted that those cunning rats would choose such an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Nobody had expected a high-level mutated life form to be so powerful. The losses this time were too heavy. Even Wang Fei's psychological defense was broken. He thought that it was because of his mistake in commanding that the hunter team suffered such heavy losses. Someone looked up at him. Only then did he realize that Li Yueming, who was still in high spirits last year, was now covered in pale white hair. Obviously, a year of non-stop deduction and research had cost him an unimaginable price. This scene shocked everyone. The alliance's members fell to their knees. He asked anxiously, "Teacher, what's wrong?" Li Yueming closed his eyes tiredly. After a long while, he said, "It's fine. I've already made progress in my research. Give me another half a year. In half a year, I'll return peace to the world." With that, Li Yueming no longer paid attention to the commotion outside. He closed the door. He hardened his heart and ignored the cries of the students outside. Many people had an unforgettable night. The loss of the hunter team was undoubtedly a heavy blow to the Star Alliance. But no matter what, the war had to continue. The news that Li Yueming had his members hold on for half a year spread throughout the Star Moon Alliance. After hearing that they only needed to fight for another half a year, they might be able to obtain hope of counter-attacking. The entire alliance instantly erupted with a powerful cohesion. After all, Li Yueming represented an omniscient and omnipotent god. He said that the Star Moon Alliance would be at peace in half a year. No matter how unbelievable this sounded, everyone firmly placed their trust in him. There was no need for any reason to distrust Li Yueming. The alliance held a short funeral for the dead in the hunter team. Then, he began to concentrate on the tense war again. With Li Yueming's promise that night. Now, even the cook auntie in the logistics department had become the most determined warrior. In order to have a home of their own. For future generations to have a tomorrow where they would not have to live in fear. Even if they died 10,000 times. They'd gladly fight for half a year for Li Yueming. Chapter 33. The last 30 days. The war continued. Moreover, as time passed, the situation on the battlefield became more and more precarious. Currently, the Star Moon Alliance's territory was only one-third the size at its peak. But they needed to feed two-thirds of the population. There was still some food stored in the warehouse. However, one could imagine that as time passed, the situation would become more and more difficult. There was no choice. Now that Li Qiao had taken over all the authorities in the alliance, she could only order the exploration team to work with the transporter team. When the giant rat's attack slowed down slightly, the corpses of the mutated creatures were transported back as food. Ordinary humans would definitely avoid the corpses of mutated creatures. This was because the strange energy contained in it would cause harm to the human body. However, it was still a question of whether they could survive. Who cared how troubled they would be tomorrow? Everyone went all out. Unfortunately, since they were found collecting corpses, every time the cunning rats were repelled, they would take away all the corpses of their dead companions. The Star Moon Alliance had only made some gains in the first month or two. In the future, they would not be able to eat mutated creatures even if they wanted to. As they fought back with all their might again and again. 3 months passed. Looking around, the third direction was filled with the corpses of giant rats. The rotting corpse emitted a nauseating smell. After the blood fermented, it overflowed. It turned into red rivers on the ground. At the beginning of the attack, the rats were still arrogant. Millions of mutated rats formed a tide and rolled over. It really seemed endless. There were fewer and fewer large rats. The rat group among the 8 mutated creatures might really be endless. But at least there was a limit to the rats in this area around Fallout Shelter 0911. After fighting for so long, they had lost such a huge amount of vitality. It was also quite draining on the rats. The leader of the rats who was in charge of commanding this battle had already suspected it several times. When they attacked Fallout Shelter 0911, they had never encountered such intense resistance. Usually when the rats pounced over, the soldiers standing guard on the city wall were so frightened that their legs went weak. Many of the upper echelons of the shelter fled overnight. It looked like an incomparably sturdy fortress. It only took them less than a week to completely occupy it. They were just a group of defeated soldiers. They actually used hundreds of thousands of soldiers to block them outside the defensive circle for a year. Such a strange battle. He was also puzzled. Everything ended here. The intense battle with the Star Moon Alliance had already attracted the Rat King's attention. After understanding the specific situation, the Rat King had already ordered the rats around Fallout Shelter 0911 to gather here. He believed that it would not take long. These damned humans would completely become a thing of the past. And they would become humans of the new era. The Star Moon Alliance was in a terrible state. Half a month ago, the Alliance was already in a food crisis. All the rations meant for the front line had basically been eaten. The soldiers were starving every day. Although the willpower was still strong. However, combat strength still decreased at a visible speed. The will of steel could not be eaten. How could they continue fighting when their legs were weak from hunger? Fortunately, after receiving the news, in the back shelter, from 80-year-olds to 7 or 8-year-old children, they all began to conserve their rations, eating only a few simple grass and bark every day. They sent the grain they saved to the front line by cart. This barely alleviated the crisis at the front line. However, the alliance was at its wit's end. And yet, it had been half a year since Li Yueming requested. But there were still 3 months left. 3 months. 90 days. To the current Star-Moon alliance, this was no different from an unreachable glacier. The battle continued. A month later, the Star-Moon alliance's initial elite force. All the explorers died. The Scarlet Squad picked up the weapons left behind by the exploration team and charged forward. Another month passed. The Scarlet Squad was also wiped out. Almost all the combat troops of the Star-Moon alliance were destroyed. The walls of the third defense line were almost destroyed by such a high-intensity battle. It was full of potholes. Below the city wall, a new wave of rats had arrived. Turning around to take one last look at the tightly shut door not far away, Li Qiao, who had already stood tall, took a deep breath. Then, she closed her eyes and put on her armor. Looking at the alliance, the only ones still capable of fighting were the royal court's guards, who were responsible for protecting the upper echelons. They were Li Qiao's personal guards. More than 10 years ago, the royal court's guards were the first team to follow Li Yueming and fight with the sewer bosses. Their existence would be like the setting sun, adding the brightest red light to the Star-Moon alliance. Everything seemed like a cycle. The initial starting point. In the end, it might become the final destination on this day. It was simply comical and ridiculous. None of the guards showed any fear on their faces. There was only deep regret. There were only 30 days left. As long as they persisted for another 30 days, they would have fulfilled their promise of half a year. When the time comes, the man they regarded as a god would save everything. As the entire Scarlet Squad died, everything seemed to have become a bubble in a dream, and disappeared. Under the tragic gazes of all the royal court guards, Li Qiao pulled out the thin sword at her waist. The thin sword was long and thin. It happened to be tightly pressed against Li Qiao's fair palm. This was a birthday gift that Li Yueming had tailor-made for her when she was 12 years old. The girl had kept it carefully for many years. Today, she would charge into the final battlefield with this sword. She turned around, looking at the guards in front of her. Li Qiao's expression was solemn. She didn't do any war mobilization, because the outcome of this trip was already decided. The guards who could still stay here and go up the city wall with her were clearly determined to die. At such a time, there was no need for the so-called war mobilization. Li Qiao's gaze swept across the young men. She could feel the fanaticism in their eyes. She suddenly raised the thin sword in her hand and shouted, "Guards, charge with me." As soon as she finished speaking, the girl turned and walked away. A soldier and a sword walked towards the defensive line of the city wall without looking back. Behind her, thousands of guards saluted the young girl who was still underage not far away. Her emotions were indescribable. However, at this moment, it didn't seem that important anymore. The guards also drew their swords. They quickly followed. Without any explanation, they surrounded Li Qiao in the middle. The meaning of this action was very simple. Even if it meant death, they had to be the first to die. All the members of the Star-Moon alliance fought to the last soldier. They would never take a step back. Chapter 34. Drawing their sword. The last of the Star Moon Alliance's capable defenders stepped onto the city wall. They began to prepare for the final battle. All the guards of the royal court looked excited and determined. Even if it was just to buy an extra hour. Perhaps the Son of God could create a miracle in this hour. When all the members stepped onto the city wall and looked down at the intersection of the two defensive circles, a black tide surged over. After a year and a half, the tide of rats had already decreased greatly. The number of rats attacking this time was several times more than the first. Not only did mid-level mutated rats appear, there were also high-level mutated life forms that had never appeared on the main battlefield before. Everyone was stunned for a moment. Many people quickly reacted. The only reason for this abnormality was that the rats in the other shelters had come. However, when they were at their wits' end, the enemy's strength had increased several times. To the Star Moon Alliance, this was undoubtedly adding insult to injury. All the members of the alliance stood on the city wall. They looked down at the rats that were tightly packed together. It was suffocating pressure. It was enough to magnify the fear in people's hearts. Seeing this scene, all the members' faces turned pale. It was not that they were afraid of death. Instead, they were facing so many mutated rats. They might not even be able to stop them for a moment. Li Qiao's face was also pale. This was her first time on the battlefield. There were all kinds of rotting corpses, white maggots, and murderous rats. It was extremely unfamiliar to her. She forced herself to calm down. She was Li Yueming's sister. She had to do everything to the best of her ability. She raised her rapier. Li Qiao said with a pale face, "Charge." Her voice was soft. But in the current environment, even if it was just a single word, it also took a lot of courage. Hearing her command, the royal court guards also calmed down from the chaos. Everyone raised their swords. The current Star Moon Alliance, except for the swords they carried with them, there were no longer any usable weapons. In the endless rat tide, the 1,000 odd guards of the royal court were like insignificant stones. But it was such a small stone. Now, they had to face the huge waves alone. The rat tide was getting closer and closer. Under the lead of the high-level giant rat, they quickly climbed the city wall. 1 meter. 2 meters. 3 meters. Gradually, more and more mutated giant rats climbed up the wall. They looked at the terrifying monsters baring their teeth at them. The soldiers' angry roars sounded extremely majestic. Kill. Protect Princess Xiao. The guards surrounded Li Qiao in the center of the crowd. And themselves. They held their long swords and started fighting the mutated giant rats. After learning the breathing technique, the combat strength of these guards had long exceeded the limits of ordinary humans. As soon as they crossed weapons, many soldiers relied on their sharp blades and immense strength. One killed nearly 100 giant rats. But before many people could rejoice, their lives came to an abrupt end. More giant rats swarmed forward. Even a low-level mutated rat was the size of a basketball. Thousands of them pounced over. It instantly gnawed the outermost guards into bones. For a moment, screams could be heard everywhere. It was like the most hair-raising symphony in the world. Row after row of guards fell. Seeing that the situation was bad, the remaining members began to retreat. As they retreated, someone shouted from the side, "Quickly send Princess Xiao to the beacon tower. We can die, but nothing must happen to the princess." A group of people roughly lifted Li Qiao up high. Moreover, a human ladder was forcefully built in the ratted. The beacon tower they were talking about was something similar to a watchtower on the city wall. This was because every battle required him to observe the movements of the mutated creatures in advance. Therefore, the watchtower was set extremely high. It could effectively prevent rats from attacking. This group of soldiers was prepared to exchange their lives for Li Qiao's survival. The entire scene was very chaotic. The group was flustered. They wanted to hide Li Qiao, although Li Qiao also cultivated the breathing technique. But she was still young. And she was a girl. Facing a group of fully armed royal court guards, she had no means of resisting. Just as the group of guards set up the human ladder and were about to send Li Qiao into the watchtower, an exceptionally strong mutated giant rat tore open the outer defense of the royal court's guards. It suddenly bit towards Li Qiao, who was in the center. Its sharp fangs were like a sword. Come to think of it, if this attack hits, Li Qiao was likely to be killed on the spot. Around her, the members of the royal court's guards were all furious. They charged forward without a care for his life. Everyone wanted to stop this high-level mutated rat. The long swords in their hands slashed at the giant rat's body, but they could only scratch its fur. Not even blood splattered. The giant rat looked at them provocatively. His gaze revealed human-like contempt and resentment. He easily shook off all the guards around him and approached Li Qiao at an unstoppable speed. This fellow had long recognized that this girl in front of them was the one who caused them to suffer the greatest losses in this attack. Moreover, he could not wait to tear her into pieces. Looking at the terrifying monster that was getting closer and closer to her, a rare look of fear appeared on Li Qiao's pale face. Although she was already prepared to die in battle before coming. But for some reason, when the monster really approached, only then did Li Qiao smell fear in the increasingly dense aura of death. Am I going to die? She was going to die. But why did she suddenly feel a little indignant? She closed her eyes in despair. In a daze, she recalled the scene when she made an agreement with Li Yueming a year ago. Pinky promise, never change for 100 years. In her mind, Li Yueming's lively face made her think that their agreement had happened yesterday. Whether it was a promise to tell her a story or a promise to spend her birthday with her. Or she could go to her parent-teacher conference before she promised. This child's hand-holding trick would eventually end with Li Yueming breaking his promise. Because Li Yueming was always like this. When he was busy, he would forget everything he had promised her. Sometimes, she would also feel a little unhappy, but she would not really be angry every time. After all, her parents had told her when she was young. Her brother was a genius. Geniuses were born to do great things. Therefore, she could not expect her brother to grow up with her like the brothers of other children. Later, she realized that this was indeed the case. Li Yueming was really too busy. Sometimes, even she would not see him for half a month. Once he started researching. He even locked himself in his room for 2 to 3 months without taking a step out. However, this did not stop her from playing such a childish game with Li Yueming. Although she knew that Li Yueming would eventually die. But she still enjoyed it. Two people closest to each other would always accommodate each other, right? Her brother could not grow up with her. Then wouldn't it be good to play childish games with her occasionally? Pinky swear. No change for 100 years. It seemed that it was finally her turn to break her promise. Chapter 35. Fulfilling the promise, the birth of a new century. On the battlefield. The moment Li Qiao closed her eyes, everything around her seemed to have been stopped. There was only a faint smoke. Li Qiao suddenly smelled a familiar scent. The faint smell of soap mixed with the smell of sweat. It was a very pleasant smell when mixed together. Li Qiao opened her eyes in a daze. She found herself in a warm embrace. She looked up. She looked at the white-haired figure in front of him. Compared to a year and a half ago. At this moment, it felt like a century had passed. Li Qiao recognized this familiar yet unfamiliar figure immediately. She was stunned for a long time. Li Qiao's voice trembled slightly as she said in disbelief, "Brother, brother." He put her down. Li Qiao looked around. Only then did she realize that the two of them had already arrived at the watchtower on the city wall. He looked at the densely packed rats under his feet, as well as the royal court guards who were still resisting with all their might. He finally said, "Do you still remember the initial promise I made to you?" Li Qiao was stunned. They had not seen each other for a year and a half. She never expected that Li Yueming's first sentence would be to ask her a question. She thought about it. Li Qiao quickly replied, "Brother will create a world with stars and the moon for me. At that time, no one will have to worry about tomorrow." He seemed to have fallen into a distant memory. His white hair looked abnormally ancient. But at this moment, he was like a sword that had been polished for 10 years. It was fine if it did not make a sound. Amazing. He looked at his sister, who was only half a head shorter than him. Li Yueming said seriously, "Watch carefully. I'll fulfill the promise I made to you back then today." After he finished speaking, Li Yueming drew the sword at his waist with a clang. "All members of the Star Moon Alliance, listen up. I've solved the mystery of the strange energy. From today onwards, the so-called mutated creatures will become inconspicuous as rocks in the waves of the new era. Victory will definitely belong to humanity." Li Yueming jumped down from the platform. In midair, the sword drew an arc that was dozens of meters long. He suddenly slashed down. There was a boom. The entire city wall under his feet was split into two. The city walls and bricks were still collapsing. Li Yueming slowly stood up from the dust. The mutated giant rats screamed and kept retreating under his slash. The hundreds of royal court guards could only see his back. Everyone looked at him with shock and excitement. After a short moment of shock, all the members of the royal court's guards felt their blood boil. They shouted in unison, "Long live the Son of God! Victory will definitely belong to humans." Li Yueming turned around and glanced at the few hundred survivors behind him. He looked down at the corpses and broken bodies all over the ground. It was just a glance. The shocking scene on the battlefield was enough for him to know everything. He said and asked nothing. He looked at the endless tide of rats not far away. The newly developed breathing technique was activated at maximum power. After adjusting every bone and muscle in his body, under the unbelievable and shocked gazes of all the guards, Li Yueming was alone. He actually rushed towards the tide alone. Blood dyed every inch of the Star Moon Alliance red. Many years later, the Star Moon Alliance stood at the peak of civilization. However, this land was still red. There was not even a blade of grass within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. After the special long saber in Li Yueming's hand cut it off, he tore it apart with his hands. After being strengthened, his body was already invulnerable. The giant rat's all-out attack could at most leave a white mark on his skin. In any case, as long as he felt tired, Li Yueming circulated his breathing technique and kept absorbing the strange energy emitted from the giant rat's corpse. The so-called strange energy was very violent. Too much contamination will affect the consciousness and body of living creatures. In serious cases, it might even mutate. However, Li Yueming discovered during the process of decomposing the corpse, after the strange energy absorbed by the living beings was filtered, it turned into a relatively gentle energy. It was far less violent than the ordinary energy dissipated in the air. In order to absorb this energy, Li Yueming racked his brains. He spent a year and a half without sleep. He did not even hesitate to use his lifespan to squeeze out his potential. He had solved the mystery of the strange energy before the final battle ended. A brand new breathing technique was created. It could extract gentle energy from dead life forms. With this, his combat strength increased by dozens of times. As long as there were corpses around. Desperately, Li Yueming could transform into a tireless human-shaped killing machine. As Li Yueming slaughtered the rats, he plundered their strange bodies for his own use. He did not know how many days he had been fighting. He did not know how many rats he had killed. After he casually tore apart an exceptionally huge rat, the tide stopped. The large group of rats fled. It quickly disappeared. When the royal court guards found him, the sun was setting. Li Yueming stood on a pile of corpses that were more than 100 feet tall. The red sunset merged with the blood on the ground. It turned into a hellish world. This day was called the birth of the new century by all humans on planet 3-024. And the creator of the new century, Li Yueming, whom later generations called the savior of human civilization. They were hurriedly carried to the hospital by a group of people. Li Yueming fulfilled a promise. He had broken all his other promises. Chapter 36. The Broken Ship of the New Era, 3K. This battle. Many people lost everything. Their homes were destroyed. The farmland that they had worked so hard to cultivate had also been destroyed by the attack. The child had lost his father. The woman had lost her husband. Parents lost their children. All this pain would become a wound in everyone's hearts that would never heal. They would probably not forget this day. However, the Star-Moon Alliance was still standing. Because, to them, as long as Li Yueming was still alive, he was still guiding them forward. So then, even if he was crushed to pieces, they were not afraid at all. However, the miracle did not appear again. Li Yueming, who was covered in blood, was carried into the simple infirmary. All night, everyone in the alliance who had some medical knowledge was summoned to the infirmary. However, there was still no good news. Li Qiao, who had cried all night, appeared in front of everyone with red eyes. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. Many people even started to sway on the spot. Li Qiao pursed her lips. She tried her best to suppress the sadness on her face. There was a long silence. Finally, she gritted her teeth and choked, "My brother, he died." Hearing these few words, whoosh! The remaining 100,000 citizens of the Star-Moon Alliance were in an uproar. Everyone's faces were filled with disbelief, even though they were prepared. But when hearing this news, however, it still made countless people dizzy. Many people could not withstand the blow and fainted. They withstood the destruction of their homes and the separation of their families. And now, the news of Li Yueming's death was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Countless people wailed. The entire city was filled with cries that made people cry. As Li Yueming's sister, as Princess Qiao of the Star-Moon Alliance, Li Qiao took the position of leader of the alliance. Wang Fei, who had just completed the rehabilitation training for his broken arm, was appointed as the deputy leader. The alliance did not cause any commotion. After all, in the past, Li Qiao and Wang Fei already held leadership positions. Now, they have only changed from private to public. One day, 23 years ago, Li Yueming came quietly. 20 years later, Li Yueming left quietly again. When he was around, no one could hide his brilliance. His existence was like the sun in the sky. It made everyone pale in comparison. But after he left, only then did the crowd realize. In fact, it didn't seem to affect the daily operations. Only then did many people understand. Perhaps Li Yueming had anticipated this a long time ago. He had long prepared for his fated ending. The transfer of rights went smoothly. After Li Qiao and Wang Fei went on stage, the first order they gave together was to promote the new breathing technique. Li Yueming had already sorted out all the information on the breathing technique and placed them in the safe in the laboratory. Even if he died, Li Qiao could also open the safe and retrieve the documents. There were a total of 5 safes. Every time she opened one, it was filled with various blueprints and information. She looked at the stacks of handwritten manuscripts. Li Qiao couldn't help but tear up again. She never understood why Li Yueming would lock himself in that small and enclosed house. Looking at the stacks of manuscripts left behind, Li Qiao finally understood. The brother who couldn't grow up with her. He just wanted her to live in an environment that ordinary humans should live in. For this reason, he worked day and night. He broke pencil after pencil under the dim yellow light. However, it was too late to understand everything now. What she could do was to inherit Li Yueming's will. It allowed all humans and her to return to the environment that should have been theirs. A world where there was no longer a tomorrow. The new leader gave the order. Naturally, everyone in the Star Alliance obeyed. However, it was obvious. It was impossible for them to learn the new breathing technique in a short period of time. The Alliance soldiers suffered heavy losses. Almost all the elite warriors died in the wave of rats. Only the royal court guards and hundreds of surviving veterans were left. Fortunately, this time, it really hurt the Rat Clan, one of the 8 mutant creatures. For the time being, the rats did not dare to organize another tidal wave of attack. This gave the Alliance a chance to catch its breath. Under the efforts of Li Qiao and Wang Fei, the Star Moon Alliance, which was in ruins, had gradually resumed production. Although everyone was still in extreme pain. But sorrow and pain could not be eaten. The dead were already dead. The living had to continue living. Only alive. Only then could they inherit the will of those who came before him. The survivors picked up the human bones and broken limbs left on the battlefield. A pit had been dug for them. And a grand funeral was held. Li Yueming's body was buried in the middle of the pile of broken limbs. This was also a unanimous decision after everyone's discussion. If hell existed in this world, with so many Star Moon Alliance members accompanying him, Li Yueming would not be lonely along the way. On the day of the burial, the entire Star Moon Alliance cried. Everyone felt as if something in their lives had been cut off. This kind of heart-wrenching pain from the soul was often more painful and incurable than physical injuries. After burying everything, the people's pain finally closed as the coffin closed. Time passed, day by day. The Alliance quickly cleaned up the traces left behind by the war, and built a new home on the ashes. The new breathing technique left behind by Li Yueming was quickly promoted. After many people got used to cultivating, they realized that other than some minor changes, there was not much difference between the new breathing technique and the old breathing technique. The progress of the Alliance members in cultivating the breathing technique instantly increased by leaps and bounds. The Alliance's strength had unknowingly become stronger. Time flowed like water, never to return. The second year. With Li Qiao's approval, the new hunter team and exploration team were officially established. They began to clean up the surrounding mutated creatures. They were also equipped with the new breathing technique. The soldiers were all extremely brave. Soon, the mutated creatures around the Alliance were wiped out. They went on to expand the territory. After resolving the problem of food supplies, the Alliance's development speed had risen to another level. Li Qiao took out the blueprint left behind by Li Yueming. She began to collect minerals around the territory to develop technology. Year after year passed. 10 years passed. The Alliance was developing more and more rapidly. Under Li Qiao's plan. Exploration Team, Hunter Team. The newly formed Scarlet Squad appeared outside Fallout Shelter 0911. The mutated creatures also evolved very quickly. The current Fallout Shelter 0911 was under their construction. It was no different from a city ruled by humans. They had to remove animal characteristics like rat tails, rabbit ears, and cat claws. It was obvious. This group of mutated creatures had learned the operation of human society very successfully. However, the wild beasts had lost their wildness and chose to evolve into humans. Could they still be called wild beasts? No one knew this result. No one cared. At this moment, Everyone in the Star-Moon Alliance, who had a blood feud, was more like a beast than a beast. Several teams attacked. They attacked the mutated creatures living in Fallout Shelter 0911 at lightning speed. Although this group of mutated creatures had good combat strength, they also knew that there was a human force growing not far from the shelter. However, the long years of living as a human had made them lose their original wildness. Under the absolute suppression of the Alliance's combat strength, the wild beasts quickly scattered in all directions. It only took the Alliance half a day to reclaim Fallout Shelter 0911. The first shot of the counterattack was officially fired. Time continued to pass. 2 years after seizing Fallout Shelter 0911. This was the first time the Alliance had seen refugees other than them. This group of refugees had traveled a long way. From the moment of seeing them, they trembled. After interrogation, they found out that the 8 mutated beast kings were constantly sweeping through human forces. It seemed to be preparing to wipe out the other human forces. Then, they would gather their forces and destroy Fallout Shelter 0911 in one fell swoop. After receiving the news, Li Qiao was silent for a long time. 10 years of experience had made her a mature politician. Many times, she was already used to not showing her emotions on her face. However, she also felt a rare trace of nervousness. 10 years ago, the Star-Moon Alliance led by Li Yueming only faced a few tribes under the Rat King. What she had to face was the full attack of the 8 royal families. Even with the improved breathing technique, it was an extremely difficult battle for the entire Star-Moon Alliance. In the dead of night, Li Qiao hugged the rapier that Li Yueming gave her and muttered, "Brother, please give me some strength." She couldn't help but tear up as drops of tears fell. After a while, she wiped her tears. Li Qiao puffed up her cheeks and said, "This lousy ship of the new era is really not easy to sail at all." Chapter 37. The finale of all finale, 4K, end of Volume 1. In a blink of an eye, 10 years passed quietly again. The mutated creatures finally launched an all-out attack on the Star Alliance. The news of the Star-Moon Alliance's counterattack and victory finally spread throughout the world. The human survivors who were struggling finally saw the light of victory against the mutated creatures. All the surviving humans that were on the verge of extinction began to advance towards the Star-Moon Alliance. Fallout Shelter 0911, where the Alliance was located, was collectively known as the Holy Land by all humans in the world. Entering the Holy Land to make a pilgrimage, it became the highest aspiration of survivors on all 3-024 planets. In 10 years, the population of the Alliance had expanded by dozens of times. There were millions of them. More and more survivors came to the pilgrimage. The number was still rising. The increasing population helped Li Qiao share a lot of the pressure. It allowed her to withstand the attacks of the mutated creatures. The increase in population poses more problems. There were also many flaws that had not been discovered before. Li Qiao and Wang Fei still needed to continuously push for the internal innovation of the Star-Moon Alliance. This was the most difficult 10 years. Even though Li Qiao had learned the breathing technique since she was young, her current physique was not ordinary. She almost couldn't withstand such high-intensity work. After 10 years, they finally turned a corner. They began to gain an advantage from the battle of the mutated creatures. Another 5 years passed. The rise of the Alliance was unstoppable. The battle with the mutated creatures was not over yet. All humans can already see a bright future. Li Qiao was almost 40 years old. Her body and appearance were still young. The vicissitudes in her eyes could not be concealed. Many members were worried about her condition. This was because they discovered that Li Qiao often sat alone on a watchtower not far from the city wall. She looked at the stars in the sky barefooted. According to the news spread by the big shots of the royal court's guards, this seemed to be the first leader of the Star Alliance. It was also the place where Li Qiao's brother died in battle. Many people guessed. Perhaps Li Qiao had not recovered from the trauma of her brother's death. For a dead man. Was it worth it? Under the publicity of Li Qiao and Wang Fei, Li Yueming's image had already spread widely. However, many people were outsiders after all. They scoffed at those godly words. But no one dared to say it. This was because as long as the locals heard this, they would immediately be expelled from the city. 2 years later, Li Qiao could no longer hold back the longing in her heart. Most of the time, she would feel that what she was experiencing now was a dream. Perhaps one day, after waking up from her sleep, her brother would suddenly appear at her bedside. He would greet her with a smile, but so many years had passed. No matter how unwilling Li Qiao was to believe it, it was time for her to face reality. She returned to Li Yueming's former research lab. She opened the last safe that Li Yueming had left for her. The other 4 boxes had been opened a long time ago. It contained all kinds of technological information that Li Yueming had painstakingly researched. It was because he had these blueprints and information. She was able to build such a colossal country in just 30 years. Only this safe. Li Qiao tried all the passwords but could not open it. She didn't know what was inside. But after a few moments of hesitation, in the end, she did not choose to open it forcefully. Let it be. She had one last thought. She was almost out of ideas. She had returned here after so many years and was prepared to open the box to see what was going on. The patterns on the surface of the box were frosted. It was simple and crude. Li Qiao recognized it. This was the storage box that Li Yueming had personally chiseled out for her when she was very young. She exerted a little force. The storage box was easily opened. Li Qiao held her breath and looked into the box. There was a letter in the box. Opening the envelope, there was a special breathing technique written on it. Li Qiao's gaze swept across it. She did not stay for long, because she found a dried seed in the middle of the letter. After so many years of weathering, the outside of the seed was already very shriveled. She wondered if it could grow up smoothly with some fertilizer and water. Li Qiao found a basin of soil. She planted the seed into the soil basin. Fertilizer and water. It was done in one go. She found herself a chair and began to carefully study Li Yueming's special breathing technique. Half a year passed in a flash. Under Li Qiao's meticulous care, the originally shriveled seed miraculously grew branches and leaves. Unexpectedly, what grew out of the seed was actually a blood-red flower. This is the spider lily that brother told me about that can allow people to meet in the next life. Li Qiao's pupils constricted. She looked at the blood-red flower in front of her. Her expression was filled with excitement. When she was young, Li Yueming had told her the story of the spider lily. Chapter 38. The final 4K, end of Volume 1_2. The legendary spider lily was as red as blood. Flowers bloom for 1,000 years, and wither for 1,000 years. It only grew on the other side of hell. It symbolized death and reincarnation. What was Li Yueming hinting at by leaving a flower seed that looked like a spider lily in the last box? Li Qiao thought of many things. She believed that her brother would not do anything meaningless. Leaving these 2 things behind must mean something. Li Qiao walked out of Li Yueming's research lab. She gathered all the members of the Star Moon Alliance for a meeting. She ignored the looks of disbelief on everyone's faces. She officially announced that she would step down as the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, officially handing it over to Wang Fei. Such a huge piece of news undoubtedly caused a huge commotion. Everyone in the Alliance was shocked. As for the 2 people at the center of the vortex, Wang Fei and Li Qiao did not say anything. Wang Fei saw determination in Li Qiao's eyes. He closed his eyes and took 2 deep breaths. Only then did he slowly nod and say, I hope I can live up to your expectations. After handing over all the work, just like Li Yueming 35 years ago, Li Qiao locked herself in the Dark Research Institute. She began to study the strange energy in depth. She tried to find the clues that Li Yueming had left for her in the breathing technique. But for many years, she did not gain anything. Li Qiao could clearly feel that there was no mistake in her direction. However, her talent was too slow. There was no way to understand what Li Yueming was trying to express. Since then, the Star-Moon Alliance officially entered the era of Wang Fei. After taking over everything, Wang Fei worked hard and showed his exceptionally powerful political skills. Promoting domestic reform, he grabbed the progress on the battlefield with one hand. His rule were ruthless and hard. In just 2 years, they had recaptured 11 shelters. This was the final victory for the Star-Moon Alliance. The mutated creatures were just as Li Yueming had predicted. It became an inconspicuous wave under the mighty trend of the era. The mutated creatures could no longer make a comeback. 30 years later, the 8 royal families of the mutated creatures were severely injured. The remaining mutated creatures raised their flags and surrendered, hoping to coexist with humans. Wang Fei thought for a long time. He recalled decades ago, the first time he listened to Li Yueming's lecture with the other children in the sewer. What he talked about. He closed his eyes and sighed. He decided to suppress the hatred in his heart and choose to negotiate with the mutated creatures. Li Yueming's teachings and years of war had long made him understand. Hatred and war cannot solve everything. It could only make everything worse. There were many mutated creatures. Although they could not defeat them head-on, they could not be exterminated with the current strength of humans. Only appropriate compromise and tolerance can open a wider path. As soon as his decision was announced, it triggered a heated discussion among everyone. Many Star-Moon Alliance citizens who were blinded by hatred could not understand this decision. Too many of their relatives and friends had died at the hands of the mutated creatures. They wished they could exterminate them altogether. Naturally, they were extremely unwilling to accept Wang Fei's decision. Not only did someone mention the hatred that Li Yueming had died at the hands of the mutated creatures. There were also people who told Wang Fei about how this will come back to bite them from behind. Wang Fei did not even bat an eyelid. He said coldly, "A generation does what a generation does. I only care about making every decision I make now. As for the future, what does it have to do with me?" Everyone was silent. After all, Wang Fei's qualifications and status were too stable and secure. Other than Li Qiao, who had been locked up in the Star-Moon Alliance for a long time, no one could suppress him. This resolution was carried out under Wang Fei's unyielding attitude. The Alliance and the outsiders sent representatives to negotiate. It was also this year. The Star-Moon Alliance was officially re-established. It was known as the Star-Human Federal Empire and had officially begun to record the history of the Federal Empire. The history before the founding of the Star-Human Federal Empire was collectively known as the first year of the Cataclysm. The history of the founding of the state is commonly known as the first year of the Federal Empire. Star-Moon Empire Calendar Year 88. The first head of state, Wang Fei, was seriously ill. Although cultivating the breathing technique had extended his lifespan by dozens of years. However, he was still an old man who had survived the cataclysm. He was already on his last breath. He looked at the extremely nervous descendants beside the bed. Wang Fei's eyes were cloudy. He raised his trembling head and said, "Teacher, I've finally helped you build a world where no one has to worry about tomorrow. Did your spirit in heaven see it? I'm here to see you." This old man, who had spent half his life fighting, took his last breath. That day, both empires lowered their flags by half. The whole city is draped in white silk. In the future, be it mutated creatures or humans, they held this old man's life in high regard. He had really done his best in his life. They ended the war with iron fist methods. It also left behind a peaceful era where humans and mutated creatures coexisted. Wang Fei's children came to the empire's ancestral land to find Li Qiao. He wanted her to host Wang Fei's funeral. However, when they knocked on the door, they realized that it was empty. Li Qiao left behind a letter. It said that she had descended to the ground before the cataclysm. It was a meteorite that had triggered a strange wave. The two of them were stunned. In the end, he could only return empty-handed. Year 238 of the Empire calendar. After nearly 100 years of rapid development, humanity once again stood at the top of the planet's food chain. The entertainment industry began to develop. There were all kinds of novel things. A group of beautifully dressed students from Imperial Capital University were conducting extracurricular teaching activities under the guidance of a teacher. Their destination was to inspect and visit the sewers of Fallout Shelter 0911. He was experiencing the difficult situation of humans more than 100 years ago. It is a way to educate students to remember hardships and think of the good times. Under the repeated repairs, the sewers had already changed beyond recognition. Not only were there lights installed above their heads, the dirty and smelly mud and various miscellaneous items were also cleaned up. It was to make it easier for others to come and admire it. The teacher led the way. After passing a few signs that showed the way, he stopped in the depths of the underground world. Stretching out his finger, he pointed at a house in the sewer that was piled up with wooden planks and stones. Students, this is the place where the founder of our star empire, the father of the Human Federation, Lord Li Qiao, once lived. Many students were curious. But they looked up and down. No matter how one looked at it, it was just a house made of broken stones. A chubby boy asked in confusion, "Teacher, can this house made of broken wooden planks and broken stones live in?" The teacher scratched his head and said, "Of course. The first batch of Star Moon Alliance members were all underground residents. At that time, it was already not easy for us humans to survive. It's..." Speaking of this, a fashionable girl interrupted, "Stop, teacher, don't say any more. My ears are getting tired of hearing these words." The other students also laughed. One of the boys laughed and said, "Teacher, can we progress faster? I even asked a cat-eared girl to watch a movie today." He looked at the young men and women in beautiful clothes in front of him. He looked at the broken stone house behind him. The teacher sighed and spread his hands helplessly. "In that case, let's move freely." The ships of the new era had already set sail, but they could no longer carry the souls of the old era. Chapter 39. I'm talented, next time I'll fill it very simple. Detected death of reincarnator. This simulation reincarnation has ended. Returning to the reincarnation space, Li Qiao felt his vision go dark. In just half a second, he felt as if his soul had suddenly lost connection with his body. Then, he seemed to float out of his body. Only then did this strange feeling slowly disappear. Li Qiao opened his eyes. He stretched out his hands and stared at it for a long time. Only then did he realize that he had returned to a white reincarnation space. He briefly recalled his short 20 years on planet 3-024. It was as if it was really just a dream. The smart and sensible sister, Li Qiao. There were parents living in the rough. Student Wang Fei, who always felt that he was not outstanding enough. One vivid figure after another flashed through his mind like a slideshow. He had lived enough for the past 20 years. It was exciting enough and great enough. The only pity was that as a son, he had not been filial to his parents. As an elder brother, he did not accompany his sister Li Qiao's growing up years. As a teacher, he was always too strict with his students. Was there any regret? There were still some. After all, he had lived in that world for so long. It was impossible for him to not have any feelings. However, most of the time, Ending it regretfully was the normal outcome. Forget about the dream of a reunion. As a reincarnator, from the moment he entered the reincarnation world, he was destined to die alone. To Li Yueming, the kindest thing he could do was endure loneliness alone. He could only hope that Li Qiao could survive. No wonder many people said that the stronger a reincarnator was, the stranger their temper would be. He shuttled through the endless reincarnation worlds. If he couldn't get rid of some memories in time, it would be strange if he wasn't mentally deranged. He calmed down a little. Li Yueming looked at the reincarnation mark. This time, his score would definitely not be low. As for how high it could be, he needed the reincarnation mark to accurately calculate. Welcome back to the reincarnation space. The score is being calculated. You have successfully lived past 18 years old in this reincarnation and changed all your fate trajectories. Basic score increased from D to C. Reward, 2000 reincarnation points. In this reincarnation, you have changed the fate of the destined child, Li Qiao. Imprint score increased from C to B. Reward, 5000 reincarnation points. In this reincarnation, you changed the fate of all sewer residents and sent them to the surface world. Imprint score increased from B to A+. Reward, 10,000 reincarnation points. You have successfully created the strange breathing technique in the third rank apocalyptic world and used it to change the fate of all humans. Imprint score increased from A+ to S+. Reward, 50,000 reincarnation points. You have made an indelible contribution to Planet 3-024 in this reincarnation. Because of your existence, Planet 3-024's apocalyptic wasteland planet has successfully upgraded to Planet 4-0241. Imprint score increased from S+ to SSS. Reward, 200,000 reincarnation points. This reincarnation score is SSS. Score exceeding C-. Reincarnation mark has been permanently bound. Your serial number is 7001611. Reward settlement completed. You have obtained additional reincarnation authority 5 times, 267,000 reincarnation points, SSS grade reincarnation power return, 3000 reincarnator experience, and fixed number of talents *1. In addition, the will of Planet 4-0241 expresses its gratitude to you and hopes that you will come and play often when you are free. At the same time, it has given you a thank you gift. You can open the reincarnator's mailbox and sign for it. The reward has been settled and is being distributed. A series of information appeared on the reincarnation mark. Li Yueming felt his mouth go dry. Although he was already mentally prepared when he really saw such a rich reward. However, he still found it unbelievable. First was the 5 additional reincarnation rights. To put it bluntly, this thing was the lifeblood of all reincarnators. There was also a level difference between reincarnators. Level 1 reincarnators could only obtain the authority to reincarnate once a month. After using it, it was gone. He could only obtain new reincarnation authority from the reincarnation mark next month. Which meant most low-level reincarnators did not join any factions. If he did not have enough reincarnation points to buy, he could only reincarnate once a month. The most common way to obtain more reincarnation points was to increase the level of his reincarnation mark. The level 2 reincarnators could receive the authority to reincarnate twice a month. The level 3 reincarnators could obtain the authority to reincarnate 3 times a month. And so on. The higher the level of the reincarnator, the more reincarnations he received every month. Secondly, the reincarnation mark could also be obtained during the simulation. However, this condition was extremely harsh. Only when the score obtained in the reincarnation world reached A+ would there be a chance to obtain additional reincarnations. There was another way to obtain it. That was to join the faction formed by the reincarnators and perform well. Perhaps one day, when the higher UPS were in a good mood, they might reward them with reincarnation rights. The last one. It was also the most common type. That was to use reincarnation points to buy the number of reincarnations. However, there were not many reincarnators who sold the number of reincarnations. Therefore, the number of reincarnations would be especially expensive. An additional reincarnation authority could easily be sold for 30,000 to 50,000 reincarnation points in the reincarnator market. Li Yueming's simulation this time directly obtained 5 additional reincarnations. If other reincarnators knew about this, they would probably dissect him on the spot for a human experiment. However, Li Yueming's reward was far more than that. The second reward listed in the mark. A total of 270,000 reincarnation points. The reincarnation point was a hard currency used by reincarnators to exchange materials. It was equivalent to money among reincarnators. 270,000 reincarnation points. Even if he auctioned off the reincarnation authority, it was enough to auction off 5 or 6. One could imagine what kind of huge sum of money this was. It was enough for Li Yueming to lie down comfortably for the rest of his life. Then, there was an SSS level rebirth power return. This was a regular reward for the reincarnators. In short, it was to return a portion of the power obtained by the reincarnator in the reincarnation world. As for the exact amount of return, other than looking at the face, the biggest factor was the score. Normally speaking, the return of the reincarnation power of a third-rank apocalyptic world was about 20%. Reincarnators who performed quite well and scored above B rank could obtain about 30 to 50% of their strength. After all, the power level of a third-rank apocalyptic world was not very high. Therefore, the reincarnation mark was quite generous. Li Yueming's score was SSS. He had studied in the reincarnator school for so long. Until now, he still did not know how terrifying the SSS grade reincarnation power was. Li Yueming did not choose to return it immediately. He would count his gains first. His gaze continued to sweep behind him. The experience of a reincarnator and a fixed opportunity for talent. There was nothing to say about these two. The experience of a reincarnator could increase the level of the reincarnation mark. 3000 EXP was enough for Li Yueming to go from LV1 to LV2. To put it simply, Li Yueming had a chance to fix the talent of the reincarnation world to his own talent. This thing was also a treasure that reincarnators could only dream of. The market price was dozens of times more expensive than the number of reincarnations. Moreover, there were almost no channels for sale. This was because the amount of this thing produced was too little. Usually, when reincarnators obtained a fixed number of times, they had to be treated as family heirlooms. When he encountered a good talent, he would use a fixed number of times to permanently fix the talent on himself. This fixed number of rewards from the reincarnation mark was simply a pillow for Li Yueming when he was sleeping. After all, the invincible golden talent was so useful. How could Li Yueming miss it? The mechanical voice of the reincarnation mark suddenly sounded again. Beep, all rewards have been settled. Reincarnator Li Yueming, please evaluate this reincarnation. P.S. The reincarnation mark will adjust the difficulty of reincarnation according to the evaluation of all invitees. Reincarnators, please fill in the selection carefully. Remark 1, it's too difficult to change one's fate in the reincarnation world. I want to go home and find my mother. Remark 2, changing fate in the reincarnation world is very challenging. I hope we can continue to challenge it next time. Remark 3, changing fate in the reincarnation world is too simple. I can clear it with my feet. He looked at the 3 options above. Li Yueming rubbed his chin and pondered for a long time before revealing a strange smile. In any case, his talent could be increased by 100 times every time. Except for a few unlucky situations. There was no need to worry about not being able to change his fate. On the contrary, higher difficulty meant rarer material rewards to him. So, it was very simple. You're welcome. He was just a good young man passing by. Chapter 40. So you all feel it as very simple. Upon completing the questionnaire, Li Yueming heaved a sigh of relief. His gaze returned to the SSS rank power return opportunity rewarded by the system. As a reincarnator, the reason why they could have strength that exceeded that of ordinary people. The biggest reason was that after the reincarnation ended, the reincarnator would have a chance to return their strength. He could synchronize his power in the reincarnation world into his body in the real world. He wondered how much of the SSS class power return could return to him from planet 3-024. He took a deep breath. Li Yueming did not hesitate. He began receiving the energy. The next second, he felt his body heat up. Countless sweat dripped out from his pores. At the same time, a sharp pain came at any moment. It was as if he was being struck by a huge hammer. As time passed, the muscles on his body were strengthened inch by inch. His physique was many times stronger than before. After a long time, the SSS class power return finally stopped. Li Yueming closed his eyes and sensed his current physical condition. Then, he suddenly threw a punch. Instantly, the entire reincarnation space exploded with a sonic boom from his fist wind. He carefully sensed it again. Li Yueming suddenly realized that his physical strength had returned to the peak state of tearing a giant rat apart. D*MN, the SSS grade power return effect is so powerful? It actually returned all my power on planet 3-024 to me. After confirming that he had not sensed wrongly, Li Yueming was shocked at the 100% return of strength or something. He had always thought that it was impossible. After all, the reincarnation mark was the middleman of the platform, it was normal for them to get some kickbacks. But now, he has really achieved a 100% return. Although it was only a low-level third-rank apocalyptic world, it could be considered a miracle. He felt the explosive strength in his body. Li Yueming was obviously in a very good mood. Use the talent to lock in the gold talent infinite deductions. Then, Li Yueming opened his exclusive reincarnation mark to check his personal status. Permanent Reincarnator, Li Yueming. Reincarnation number, 700-1611. Reincarnation mark level, LV2, 1000/5000. Reincarnation point balance, 267,000. Origin force, 100-fold talent enhancement. Fixed talent, infinite deduction, gold. Fixable talent, 1. Everything was normal on the interface. Li Yueming heaved a sigh of relief. He adjusted his mentality as he prepared to leave the reincarnation space and return to the real world. At this moment, outside Linjiang City's reincarnator examination hall, the teachers and students were already in an uproar. Have you heard? Mu Yu of Year 3 Class 2 has completed the reincarnation assessment and obtained an A+ score. F***CK, is this for real? If it's really an A+ rating, then our school will probably be on the headlines of the local newspapers in Linjiang tomorrow, right? It's absolutely true. When Mu Yu came out, the reincarnation gate emitted a red light. At that time, many examines of the same batch saw it. I heard that the principal was so excited that he almost jumped down from the 5th floor after receiving the news. He's probably taking a photo with Mu Yu now. Boo-hoo, damn it, I'm so envious. Do you know how miserable my reincarnation was this time? The talent I drew was that it was a blessing to be able to eat. F***CK, in the end, I transmigrated to a wasteland world. Can you imagine the misery of entering a wasteland world with the talent for eating? Moreover, I was a dog at the beginning and relied on picking up equipment. I didn't even live for a few days before I became a pile of dog sh**t. That's not the worst part. Mine was worse. I picked an Earth-type affinity talent, and I ended up in a mountain and sea world where my evolution depends on swallowing, and my initial race was a giant earthworm. After I was born, I was killed by a chicken before I had time to move my body. I got eaten and didn't live past 3 minutes. Brother, you're too miserable. Who's to say? Outside the examination hall, a group of students who had not passed the assessment gathered together. They discussed their strange experiences in the reincarnation world. His face was filled with anger. At this moment, a boy with a chubby face suddenly said, "By the way, have you filled in the final questionnaire?" Hearing this, the other students immediately revealed strange expressions. After a while, a girl stuck out her tongue and said, "Although I only lived for half an hour, I still filled it in as very easy." Hearing this, the other boys also gloated. "Ha ha ha, I thought I was the only one. I didn't expect everyone to be the same, okay. I also filled it in as very easy." The group of people looked at each other. Although the smile on his face was a little bitter, at least he could barely hold it in for now. In any case, for them, who had not activated the permanent reincarnation mark, this was the last reincarnation. If he didn't fill it in, it would be very easy for him to face those big shots who had passed the assessment. No permanent reincarnation mark was activated was undoubtedly a life sentence for them if nothing unexpected happened. From now on, the reincarnators who activated the permanent reincarnation mark would become high and mighty rulers, and they could only cling to their territories and survive. At the thought of this, all the students who had not activated the mark felt their breathing stop. It was too painful. Not far away, the teacher in charge of recording the results glanced at them. He shook his head. A look of sympathy appeared on his face. The reincarnation world was so extreme and cruel. If he succeeded, he would soar into the sky. If he lost, it would be difficult for him to stand out again. He sighed. The teacher glanced at the time. It had been nearly an hour and a half since this batch of students entered the reincarnation world. Under normal circumstances, the examines should have finished their assessment by now. And yet, when he stood up and was about to announce the end of this assessment, he suddenly realized that there was a blank page behind a student's name. There was no record of departure time or assessment results. There are only 2 reasons for this. The first was that he did not register after the student assessment. But he sat there the whole time. The reincarnation gate, which was used to test candidates' results, did not indicate that there was a program error. Logically speaking, it was impossible to miss someone. Therefore, it was only the second possibility. There was still an examinee who did not come out of the reincarnator's space. Could it be dead? Thinking of this, the teacher stood up abruptly. His expression gradually became serious. It was not unheard of for reincarnators to die in the reincarnation world. However, it was very rare for someone to die on their first reincarnation. Such an anomaly had occurred, he must submit a report to the Association of Reincarnators. And yet, just as the assessment teacher had yet to figure out what was going on. Not far away, the reincarnation gate suddenly erupted with a dazzling golden light. The next second, a slender and muscular figure slowly appeared in the reincarnation gate. Li Qiao took a step forward. He happened to hear a group of students discussing the questionnaire outside. He could not help but scratch his head and ask in confusion, "What's going on? I thought that it would be very simple for me to fill in the questionnaire alone, but in the end, you all think it's very easy." Part 2 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.